welcome to the Regular People Podcast. I'm Wade Allen, and today I'm with Kaden. Is it Endres?
Endres, yeah.
I never say it in my head, so I always forget, even
That's
though,
fair.
like...
I mean, it's pretty phonetic. Everybody always thinks you have to, do something crazy. Endres. Yeah, and it's... No,
We had the same conversation last time, but...
Really? That's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, well, I feel like I have that conversation all the time, so I never know when I'm repeating it to the same person.
Yeah.
Because I talk about it all the time.
Yeah, because I think the last time I said your name out loud, or your last name out loud, was last podcast episode.
Okay, yeah.
So I was doubting myself again. But yeah, so Kaden was on episode 4 or something? 5?
Yeah,
something like that.
4 or 5.
Yeah. That time that was titled Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, because that's the degree you're going for.
Yes, although I've also since added a minor in Spanish, and I might be adding a Soc minor, but we'll see.
So you're going to have 5 topics?
Technically, yeah, but it's also technically only a major and a double minor. And the sociology minor is really like the requirements aren't that crazy. I would already be taking it on my own volition, mostly, so I might as well.
I guess, yeah, philosophy, politics, economics, that combo sounds close enough to not socialism, to sociology.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So today we've got a special episode, special feature, you might call it.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about atheism and theism, I guess. We're going to be talking about God, belief, and why it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
First off, why don't we just broadly define God? What do you think of when someone says God?
Man, that's... Because I guess it depends on the someone, you know? I guess the way because obviously there's multiple definitions of God, right? There's the God that you think of that goes with each, respective religion, right? Because different religions have different ideas of God. So I'll put those in one category, although I recognize that there's multiple types of God and gods within those. And then I think there's this sort of very, in the most abstract sense, a general God, right? Where it's sort of just a creator that was the start of the universe. And up in the air is whether or not maybe they had intentions with that,
whether they still exist.
Right, whether they're benevolent, any of that stuff, right? It's just there
yeah.
was or is a creator to everything. And I think semi-related to that too is sort of the Buddhist idea, right? Of God is nature, God is everything. I think those are similar, but so I guess those are the ways that I would look at God. And usually when someone says God, I'd ask them to tell me what they mean. So
yeah, that's probably a good rule generally to define your terms, especially when somebody's trying to convince you of something.
Right.
Yeah, so there's the specific concepts of God, like the Abrahamic God that you see in Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, or even Mormonism, I guess. Kind of, it's a branch off of Christianity, really crazy one, but...
Yeah, but I think, Mormonism is just a sect of Christianity. Just as Lutheranism and all that stuff.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, if you look at it from the same sort of perspective, it's equally as, ridiculous as Christianity is.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's only being raised as a Christian that Mormonism seems more ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, it's essentially just a more fundamentalist take, and I'm not, and I don't know enough about Mormonism to tell you if they are one of the people, because I know Catholics make a lot of stuff up, they just add stuff.
Yeah.
For funsies.
Every year there's 50 more saints that get made.
Right.
Not 50, but
right. And
right now there's 570 saints that exist.
Right. And I don't want to
and miracles. And...
I don't want to straw man them or anything. I'm sure the Catholics have reasons for adding that stuff. This additional thing happened. So I'm being a little intentionally unfair when I say that the Catholics just make stuff up.
Right. It's a bit of a dig, but...
Yeah, the point of the podcast, because Wade and I often talk about, we'll just comment offhand, there just really isn't a convincing argument for God, And so I think that was kind of the whole point of this podcast.
Right.
To
yeah, basically the point of this episode is to go through, if we have the time, all of the arguments for God that we know of, and try to steelman them, that is, explain them the opposite of a straw man, explain them in the way somebody who believes in them would explain them, and then talk amongst ourselves, explain why those arguments actually aren't good arguments or don't work, or what their flaws are. Right. So with the Mormonism thing, though, I believe that, what's his name, John, he's got a really basic name and I always forget what it is.
Oh, the founder of Mormonism?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a really good South Park episode on it, too. I forget the guy's name. Yeah, it's John something.
Have you ever seen the Book of Mormon, the play?
No, but I saw the South Park episode, The Book of Mormon, which was quite good.
It's not John at all. It's Joseph. Close enough. Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith.
What a plain name.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's back then, they all have plain names, basically. All the colonizers did.
Yeah. But anyway, American guy who was, like, actually, like, for a fact, a con man. He'd been in and out of prison for trying to run scams on people. He gets the brilliant idea of starting up a religion. Mm-hmm. And what he does is, I don't remember if it was him or his roommates that he was living with, but he writes a complete, like, Bible in, I think it's like 17th century, like, kind of that style English. So he's existing in like the 1850s, right? And he's trying to write his Bible as if it's like old speech, but not like ancient old speech. He's writing it in, like flowery English of 200 years before his time, rather than 2,000 years before his time or something. So that's already funky thing number one. And then he buries these books in his backyard, his own backyard, and then waits like 6 months and then digs them up and makes a whole show of it, like he just discovered these and they were planted there by angels, right? And he discovered this message from God. Mm-hmm. And contained within the Mormon belief, I believe, is that after death you get your own star.
So you had it that so your information is that he wrote it, because from what I
he did not
because
admit to writing it himself.
Yeah, because now forgive me, full disclosure, my entire the whole extent of my knowledge on the founding of Mormonism comes from the South Park episode, which I recognize is a terrible source, but because it's obviously intentionally satire. But from what I understand was that he God spoke to him,
right,
and essentially was telling him like what to write. But I think he was like illiterate or something, or he was having somebody. He either had like his friend or his wife write it down.
Yes,
and so he would sit. And he would like recite it out loud.
Yes. Oh, and it was. I think it was his roommates that he lived with.
But his wife was really skeptical, and so what she did is I think she hid it or like threw it away or something, and told him to like do it again. And he was like super pissed at her because she was doubting him and threw all this stuff away, so he had to make it up again.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're a Mormon, you don't believe that part happened, that he made it up,
right?
But I mean, just
and I think at least. Because I've seen clips, too, of, like, at least younger Mormons, like people who grew up in Mormon families who are still Mormon. And a lot of times, if you poke and prod enough, they recognize that Mormonism might not even be, and is probably quite likely to not even be the true version of events or anything like that. But they genuinely like the Mormon values, and that's why they follow it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's kind of two types of Mormons.
Yeah, well, definitely. I feel like that's how it is with any religion at all.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Whether like some people, or maybe even a lot of people, you have like really strongly believing it literally, that like they're gonna go to heaven and everything written in the Bible actually happened.
Yeah.
But then I feel like you have a large chunk of the whatever religion it is, it's just there for the community and for the values and the fact that they were raised in it, and everybody they know believes that same system.
Right. It's social capital, like especially if you live in a community like if you live in Idaho or that one state where they have like a huge Mormon population, I think it's Utah maybe, and that's a place where it's like that especially makes sense, because there's a huge amount of like social and cultural capital that comes with being that same religion that most other people around you are.
Yeah,
you're not facing ostracization or anything like that.
Yeah, basically it's always easier to just go with the flow. Mm-hmm. What everybody else is doing, do the same thing.
That doesn't make it true, but
right. It's easier for your social life, and probably your opportunities in life too. If you live in a dominantly Hindu town in India, and you decide to like openly be defiant against the Hindu way of life, they won't like you very much, probably.
I feel like this almost starts to push us towards the into Pascal's wager territory, but I think before we go into that, because this is very much Pascal's wager, right? Where it's like it's one of those. It's obviously with Pascal's wager, it's more strictly about the reward
or punishment.
Of infinite afterlife.
Yeah.
But I think talking about the fruits of the social capital, right?
I think that's probably the way you would make Pascal's wager maybe a good argument or better argument.
Or a stronger argument is by using earthly I guess material rewards.
Yeah.
But again, we can go into that and whether that's legit or not.
Yeah.
In a little bit. Maybe we should back up. We had
Yeah.
a plan. We had a structure.
Okay, yeah. So God, perhaps generally you could call God, the creator of the universe, like you were saying, the reason anything exists, the thing that is absolutely powerful.
Mm-hmm. Or rather is existence, some would argue too.
Yes. Yeah. Pantheists. I know actually a few pantheists. They think that everything is God.
Which is fun,
Yeah.
Kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, like
I'm God,
these
you're
are
God.
some sorts of ideas that I like to think about and play around with.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I take them as truth.
Exactly. That's because I have a friend, right, who's really into Buddhism, right, and he's like, and it's like, listen, I fully recognize that it has a number of good values and lessons from a philosophical standpoint. It's good as a philosophy, but that doesn't mean I need to believe the magical events in them and worship and do these practices accordingly. I can just take it as a philosophy.
Right. Well, I think that brings up the power of belief, or like whether you believe in belief. Because I think there's a lot of people who aren't religious, but they aren't anti-religious because they recognize, or like maybe not recognize isn't the right word. They think that other people believing is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you do take certain philosophies to be literally the truth, like unshakably true, like divine command, then that has good results for the world. So if you were like, they would see a difference in if you just think this philosophy has some good teachings, but you don't take it like literally,
right,
then that doesn't have the same effect as taking it literally does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too that like I feel like that's true, but I think they're doing. I think it's a miscalculation in terms of the cost benefit analysis of religion.
You think it's true
that
it has a different effect, or that the effect is good or better if you actually literally believe it?
Oh, so you're talking about the difference in effective belief. Yeah, no, I think it's. Make the distinction one more time for me. Sorry, I had another train of thought going on.
Let's say you've got Buddhism,
right,
and you think of the philosophies of Buddhism as good teachings for life, but you don't take it literally true.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Do you think the difference there between taking it literally true or just following it as
wisdom? I guess it depends. For the person who's taking it literally true versus like, are they both believing? Because if you take like, let's talk about the Buddhist teachings, right, and one cumulative work of like bullet points, right? Now the person who believes them as a philosophy and thinks they have good teachings, do they think all of these bullet points do, or are they selecting the ones they think that are good and then believing it? Because I think that's important. Because I think if you literally believe all of them and you think that they're all absolute truths, and if you don't literally believe that they're absolute truths but you like them as teachings but you like all of them, I think it's more or less the same thing. But I think oftentimes the people who, like, for example, like me, where I recognize that like Buddhism has some good values in it, but there's also some that I don't like.
Right.
Like women still can't be monks, and so there's issues there, right? And it's like, whereas if I were to believe Buddhist teachings literally, it would seem silly if I take some as literal and some that almost doesn't really compute, I feel like. Yeah,
like if you're going to take the Bible literally, then you have to follow everything that's in the Bible.
Right, because we were talking about this a little bit when we were doing preparation for the podcast, right, where a lot of times what people will do is, like if you take everything literally from the Bible... So I'm sorry. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So what happens is a lot of times what people will do is they'll pick and choose what should be taken literally after the fact. Yeah. Like it'll be like, oh, well, we recently found in this archaeological dig that this corroborates to some extent this story in the Bible. So this story in the Bible is a literal telling of historical truth. However, the stuff that we can't prove in real life, well, that's just a story. That's just a parable. We made that up. And so it's like proving after evidence is unveiled.
Or the other way too, where it's like you believe these things are literal until they're disproven by science. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, okay, actually, the story of Adam and Eve and like Earth being 6,000 years old, that is just metaphorical.
Right.
Where like 20 years before they would have said it was
exactly
literal. And now they can't anymore.
Yeah. It's like so Wade had texted me this thing yesterday that he described and I labeled the pudding fallacy.
Yeah.
Right, where you make your argument and maybe this is, maybe it isn't, you can help me out here. where it's potentially unfalsifiable, but what it is really is it's made to mold to any frame you put on it, right?
Yeah.
So like any argument you bring up, like if you put down like a square cookie cutter, the pudding will be square. You put down a triangle, now the pudding's a triangle. You know, it's
it adheres to whatever shape you want it to.
Exactly.
So yeah, basic concept of God, creator of the universe,
Right.
all-powerful being that either still exists or doesn't, and specific concepts of God we can, I guess, get into if any of these arguments are adhering or trying to prove those ones. But let's move on right now to a definition of atheism.
Okay.
So,
Do you want me to start?
would you call yourself an atheist?
Yeah, so I would call myself an atheist, but with that, you know, obviously I must define atheism because I think there are different flavors of atheists. So what I believe, I don't believe in a God, but I don't think that it's impossible that there is a God, right? So I mean, so essentially like the existing evidence, or rather lack of evidence pointing to a God, leaves me feeling unconvinced that there is a God. I think it's quite likely there is no God, as I have seen no convincing arguments. However, I recognize that it's possible, and at least for me personally, I think the most convincing argument for God is the simulation one, right? Which we'll get into in a while. But yeah, because like I consider myself an atheist, but I mean, you could make me religious. I just have yet in my life to hear a convincing argument for God.
Right.
So I'm technically agnostic, but it's like 99%. I'm 99% sure that there isn't a God. You know, it's like there's no reason for me to believe. So that's the type of atheist that I am.
Yeah. Yeah, just basically the definition of atheism, I would say, is not believing in a God.
Right. Rather than knowing that there is no God.
Yes. So then there's a difference between agnosticism and Gnosticism, and atheism and theism. Atheism, not having God belief. Theism is having God belief. Agnosticism is not knowing if there is a God. And Gnosticism is knowing that there is or is not a God. And obviously with Gnosticism, if someone's claiming to be a Gnostic theist, you can't really know. So Gnosticism is rather believing that you know, like having the feeling that you know, rather than literally knowing.
Right.
You could be a Gnostic atheist saying, I know for a fact that there is no God. But honestly, like, does that have much persuasive weight to me? Like, can you prove to me that there 100% is no God? Probably not. And like you said, 99%.
Yeah. I think, though, that also depends on who you're talking to. Because I think there's a fundamental question there that people disagree on, right? Which is whether or not we can know things.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because some people think that we can, in fact, know certain things. And those people would probably claim that Gnosticism going either direction is reasonable. But
right.
I, at least for me personally, I'm not convinced that we can know.
Right.
At least know for certain.
Yeah, I don't think that's the thing. Like, the only thing that's certain is uncertainty.
Right. And to be clear, though, like, while I don't think that we can be 100% certain on many things, if anything, I don't think that is going to stop me from, you know, taking action on what I think I know, right? Because I know things to the extent that based on the information that I've been given, I can make an informed decision that I feel good about.
Right.
So
yeah, like you can constantly get closer and closer to the absolute truth, but whether or not you can ever actually get to that truth seems unlikely. It seems that you probably can't.
Right.
Like, you can only ever form a better and better picture of what the universe looks like.
Yeah, there's essentially just claims that are more true and less true.
Yeah.
Rather than absolutely true. Although, yeah.
Right. Yeah, like, I guess an example of this is that, like, the sun rises every day, and it has done so for 4.5 billion years on this earth, and there's every reason to think that it will tomorrow, but you cannot know with 100% certainty that it actually will.
That's true.
There's every chance that the earth will just explode within the next 24 hours, or that we are in a simulation and it'll just stop running the sun.
Yeah, it's incredibly.
It could happen, but
unlikely.
it's not likely.
Yeah, based on the knowledge that we have, it's really unlikely.
Yes.
But it's within the realm. I think anything is probably within the realm of possibility, given how little we know. And I feel like, because we actually briefly had this conversation. I mean, I mostly had the conversation with myself, but we had this conversation in my international relations theory class the other day, because we were talking about, like, knowing. and I was questioning, because I initially thought, right, that, well, we must be able to eventually know everything, right? Like, because, I mean, there's, at least on Earth, right, there's a finite number of variables. There's a lot, but I think it's probably a finite number, more or less. I mean, obviously there's like, things are born. And I also realized too quickly, though, that I don't think that's true, that we can eventually know everything, because with the obvious issues that come with thinking that we can know everything about Earth, I mean, just in a general sense too, if the universe is infinitely expanding, that means there's infinitely new things to investigate and to learn. And so it seems that even if we were to get really smart where we know like 99% about the universe, given the fact that the universe is an infinite expansion, I don't think we can ever truly know everything, because there's constantly new variables.
Yeah.
Even
just in a basic like physics sense of, you need light to create information,
Well, I don't know. I don't think so. I think we need light for our information, right? Because we need it to see. But like, I mean, if we can't, I don't think you need light to create information.
This is what I mean.
Can you expand on that?
Yes. Yeah. So light is like the ultimate speed limit in the universe, at least as far as we know right now.
Yeah.
Nothing can travel faster than light. Except there is one thing that can travel faster than light, and that's the expansion of the universe itself. So because the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light, there are things we literally can't know because they're unseeable. They're unreachable.
Oh, right, because light. Yeah, no, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Galaxies are drifting further apart from each other faster than the pace of light is. Mm-hmm. So you can never actually reach the edge of the universe.
Right.
Well, at least at this rate.
Yeah, so far.
It might come back to shrinking.
Right. The whole idea, that's always been a fascinating physics concept to me, is traveling like at or above the speed of light.
Yeah.
Like, because I think that, like, it's been so many years since I've watched it, so I wouldn't be able to explain what the conclusion was. But I remember being really fascinated because there was a Vsauce video that had came out.
Vsauce is great.
About
headlights at the speed of light?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or like what would happen if you were traveling at the speed of light and you shot a bullet.
Oh, yeah.
Because like physics would suggest, right, that it would be the speed of light plus the velocity of the bullet. But that's faster than the speed of light.
Right.
I don't remember what ended up. I don't remember what he said in the video. It's funny. I watched the video like twice when I was in middle school.
You can look that up yourself and find out.
Yes.
So, agnosticism is not knowing. However, I would describe myself as an agnostic atheist.
Right.
Because I don't believe that there's a God, but like you said, I can't know for certain that there is or is not one. To me, it seems very unlikely that there is one. Mm-hmm. And also, importantly, it seems that if there is one, I don't think that God is worth worshiping or really being subservient to.
Yeah.
But maybe that's unrelated. So lots of people think that agnosticism is a weak stance. And I think it is if you leave it at that, if you just call yourself an agnostic rather than agnostic atheist. Mm-hmm. If you just say, I don't know if God exists or not, and I'm unwilling to put my foot on either side of belief, then I think that's probably a weak stance. I think
it's a false stance, because I think at least in the way you describe it, right? Because I recognize some agnostics. Like if you can say, I feel like it's more likely this or the other, I can respect that, right? But if you say that you have absolutely no idea and you feel like you'd just go either way, I feel like you're not making a legitimate pursuit of truth, right? Because there's no evidence to suggest that there is a God. And so it seems really like if you're going to give those two equal weight, it would be the same as giving it equal weight. Like if I claim that there's invisible cats walking around the kitchen right now, like,
are you going to be completely like neutrally agnostic about that?
Like if you are, I 100% love and respect your consistency.
Yeah, your integrity.
But I'm willing to bet that is not the case.
Yeah, you're not going to say there's a 50-50 chance that there is an invisible flying octopus right next to my eye.
Like it's possible, right? It's possible.
Yeah,
but it's not an equal chance.
That's the important thing. Like we have to be agnostic about invisible cats, but we should also be invisible catists.
Right.
Like there's a chance that they exist, but we shouldn't believe that they do. There's a probably very small likelihood that they do.
Exactly.
Shouldn't base our lives around invisible cats existing.
Exactly.
Or like Bertrand Russell's flying teacup around the sun.
Right.
So yes, that is atheism, agnosticism, Gnosticism. So we talked a little bit about general gods, and maybe we should talk a little bit more about specific gods. Like, for instance, the common divine attributes that God has.
Right. Yeah.
God is often, especially in Abrahamic religions, often depicted as being omnipotent, omnipresent, and
omniscient.
Yes. as well as being eternal and like timeless, like outside of time, benevolent, and perfect.
Yeah.
And as well as, in some cases, people like to say completely simple,
Mm-hmm.
or outside of like causality, like unmoved mover kind of thing. First off, these divine attributes, I think, are self-contradictory. Especially, it's easy to form the contradictory of just alone omnipotence.
Yeah.
The age-old question, like, if God is omnipotent, then can he create a rock that he is unable to lift? Because if you say, yes, he can create that rock, well, now he's unable to lift it, which makes him no longer omnipotent, because he can't lift the rock that he created. And then if he can't create the rock that he can't lift, well, now he's also not omnipotent, because he can't make a thing. And then you could say, a lot of theists answer that with like, well, God wouldn't. God is not able to do anything that makes him no longer omnipotent. So like, omnipotence means you can't undo your own omnipotence, which I think isn't omnipotence.
Yeah, so it almost seems like omnipotence is, I mean, obviously the only thing we ever claim is omnipotent is God.
Right.
Which makes sense, because I was just going to say, I don't think anything can ever truly, like, I think the idea of omnipotence is inherently impossible.
Right.
Because like you said, it's contradictory. Like, you can't create something that you can't move. But at the same time, if you're supposed to be able to, create everything,
do anything,
it doesn't work. So yeah, I think
just omnipotence is really an impossibility.
Yeah, I think so too.
And then you've got the three that Epicurus is, or Epicurus, however you want to say it.
I think it's Epicurus. At least that's how.
It's not Epicurus. There's not an I. It's either Epicurus.
I thought that's how they used to say it when I would like watch like those like shows.
Anyway, he's got that old, like, I think Greek philosopher. He's got a great quote about God's divine attributes that I think firmly dismantles the omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence thing.
Yeah.
So here's how it goes. I'm sure you've heard it before. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God?
Yeah.
So basically, the problem of evil is, I think, one of the compelling arguments against God. Certainly not the only one. But it is interesting, because if you're claiming that God is good, then why does suffering and evil exist?
Well, I will do my best to prop up what I think many theists would claim here. I think the common argument that I see tends to be usually something of the idea that we need suffering to be human. Well, associated, I guess there's two common ones I hear. So I'll start with this one, right? That we need suffering. Suffering is what makes us human, and by extension, sin and all that stuff. And that it somehow makes us better people. Which I could see from the standpoint of, you have to suffer and do the dishes to become a more responsible person. But I'm not sure how, like, starving children in other countries or in America is justified. And it's like, sure, like, because I know there will always, theists commonly, respond like, yeah, but those are all things that humans caused. But again, if God made humans, right, God could make us simply without choosing sin, right? Because it's like, and I suppose this also comes into a question of free will and how I look at free will.
People usually use that one as a defense against the problem of evil as well, free will.
But I think, like, the way I look at free will, right, is sort of like a really long multiple choice that's framed by your, mental predispositions, right, your biology, your nature, and influenced by, your environment and the, so the way your parents raised you, the environment in which you live, the cultural norms of the time, all that kind of stuff also influences, right? And the accumulation of all of those factors in your life is what's going to essentially be within your realm of possibilities. Like, there's certain decisions at a given moment in time that you're just never going to make. It's not even going to cross your mind. It's not something that's even within the realm of possibilities. And so it's like, with that, God could just make us without having that need for suffering, that desire to cause harm and all that. And that I think sort of takes care of also the other claim, right? That, well, God didn't create sin and suffering and evil. Eve chose that in the Garden of Eden, and that's why it all went wrong. But again, you could have just not, like, if God is all powerful, God could have never created the idea of sin.
Or even it's not like all suffering or sin is man-made. Much of it isn't. For instance, and you could even say that's like a lot of this natural evil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe that's not even evil, but natural suffering does actually help us to become better people or learn lessons or something.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't think that's a convincing defense against it for two reasons. One is that not all of that actually serves any sort of lesson learned function.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like the 3-year-old who has leukemia and dies, and like
right.
his entire 3-year existence is just misery.
Yeah.
What lesson did he learn?
Exactly.
Unless you're saying it's a lesson for his parents, and then I think that's a cruel God you're describing.
Yeah.
Who uses people as like tools to like
100%. Yeah, I mean,
inflict them with suffering and make you learn lessons. However, I think the other thing is that if you're saying God is good, and yet these evil things happen and it's for a good reason, but you're also saying that God is omniscient, that he knows everything. Well, if he knows everything, then he also knows the future. He knows what you will do.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no purpose of testing people in this way or of building people's character up like this if you're a God who knows how these people will react to it.
Right.
If you are a God, then you know in advance how they'll react when you like cut someone's leg off and like how the rest of their life goes, or if you have their parents die or their girlfriend breaks up with them or whatever sort of disaster that befalls them, no matter how minor.
Mm-hmm.
You will know how they'll react and what kind of person they'll become.
Well,
so it becomes pointless to do it in the first place.
I'm not even sure. Yeah, I would even look at it too from the sense that, because if I'm, at least for most people, the way most people define God, right, is that God is above or outside of time, right? Like it's all happened and going to happen, you know?
Right.
There is no time, and so
God stands outside of the block universe.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so it's not even that God knows what you're going to do. It's that for God, you've already done it,
right,
and you are doing it. It's all, and so it almost seems like from that point, I don't even know if we can conceptualize that, right? Because our very existence is based upon time.
So this is the thing, though. I think that if God is omniscient,
mm-hmm.
there's no purpose at all in Earth or like the in between realm of death, of pre-birth and then your afterlife. Mm-hmm. Say if that exists, or if you're saying that does.
Right.
If you're saying that, like, for instance, heaven is the reward for a good life and hell is the punishment for a bad life,
mm-hmm.
God could just as easily create people, put them straight into hell, straight into heaven, because he knows exactly what those people would have done on Earth. Right. And how they'd react to everything.
And further, I feel like if God was really all loving, God would understand that, like, people are imperfect and people are fallible, and so why should anyone go to hell? Because it's like,
well, he made us fallible, but yeah.
And that goes back to my point before,
right,
right, that he made us fallible, right? But like, say like, if we just grant, and this sounds stupid, right? But if we just grant that God had no way to make us infallible, right? So we have to be fallible. I feel like a truly compassionate God would recognize that people make awful, evil, and horrible decisions. And while they're responsible for those decisions, right? This isn't to say that nobody should be responsible for their actions, but to an extent, especially a God who is out. Okay, so in the United States, right? Say like you go and you kill a bunch of people. Okay, obviously you should pay the consequences for that, right? You caused a lot of suffering for a lot of people and ended a lot of lives. That's bad. Okay, but in the grand scheme of the universe, God is outside of the mundane earthly existence enough that God should be compassionate to understand, like, it's sort of the environment that created you, you know, and to know that even though you did awful, horrible things, you shouldn't suffer for an eternity. Like, I feel like a compassionate God would still be like, okay, well, you can still come to heaven, I think.
Yeah, I think that does touch on God's so-called goodness too.
Right.
Because it's like the complete miscalculation of, you did a finite crime and you get an infinite punishment for it.
Right, because even though that finite crime is awful and horrible,
you're a little bit too far away from the mic.
Even though that finite crime is awful and horrible, infinite punishment is infinite punishment.
Right.
And further, even though infinite punishment I think is probably bad, I also question if infinite punishment is even a punishment, right? Because if it's for forever, is it really going to be bad for forever? And eventually it's just normal. It's just life. You know, because it's like we could almost look at living in like Middle Ages Europe as punishment, but for them that's just life.
Yeah, you get accustomed to your circumstances.
Exactly, and same with heaven. Heaven gets less exciting if you're there forever.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the theist side of things, you could say that God is God, so he can make it so that an eternity of torment does actually remain torment.
That's like another one of those like we were talking about, like the pudding fallacy, where it's right. Non-falsifiable.
Yeah, you just make it make sense. Make God always the answer, no matter what the question is.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well then then you can't claim that religion is scientific.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people actually are doing that.
That's true. I mean, Kierkegaard wouldn't, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think many people are claiming that religion can go hand in hand with science, but not that religion and science are both like...
But I think this feeds in again to the thing where it's like, a lot of theists in conversation give a lot more... They have a lot more give than they do in practice. Right, yeah, like they'll be like, oh, well, I don't believe in this specific religion, but God in general probably exists and all this other stuff. But then in practice, they have these beliefs where like religion and science can coexist, but it really can't.
Yeah.
Because it's unscientific.
Another divine attribute that sometimes comes up, especially with people who believe in the abstract concept of God, is that God is utterly simple. And in the book I'm reading right now, which is, I don't recommend it. It's called 5 Proofs for the Existence of God by Edward Feser. And he's talking about how God is simple and everything else is composite. Everything else is made up of parts, but God is not. And in his description of what a part is, he says that even metaphorical parts are parts, such as essence and existence. Like those are parts, apparently, according to the author. And he's saying God does not have parts.
Mm-hmm.
So your essence is like what you are, and your existence is the fact that you exist. So if God doesn't have parts, then he can't have both of those things, which means that he would either exist but be like formless and be nothing, basically. Like he wouldn't have any characteristics that define him, or he does have some characteristics, but he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say all these divine attributes, like being eternal, being non-causal, being omnipotent, like all that stuff. He says God also has those things, and then I think those sound like parts to me, like.
But I
those sound like characteristics.
To push back like a little bit, though, don't you think though that because I think characteristics that are like this is kind of oversimplifying, but that are essentially personality traits, like being omnipotent, being being benevolent and all that stuff. For example, like you can be a kind person and a energetic person, and I don't think those are different parts. Those are just different traits. Right. So I feel like you can still be a single part or a non-part existence and have those traits.
The way that he described it in the book is those things would be parts, according to his definition of parts.
Yeah, well, if the author calls them parts and then says that God is partless and says that God has those things, the author is probably not being very consistent.
It doesn't sound like he's being consistent, but the way he tries to work around it is by saying that God's power and his timelessness and his goodness and his perfectness, they're all really just the same thing that we're using different words to describe. And I call bullshit on that one.
That kind of, I mean, I know that kind of feels like what you were saying to me earlier too, about how a lot of times religious people will use a lot of like vaguely defined or broadly defined words,
right? So
that they can sort of continue to have this sort of non-falsifiability, this sort of pudding.
It's
problem.
The pudding. Yeah.
It's all the pudding, man.
Yeah.
It's all just pudding.
I think you bring up that connects well to what we should probably talk about next, which is just a quick precursor on some logical fallacies that seem to come up in religious argument a lot. And that's one of them, ambiguity. Using words with ambiguous meaning so that you can kind of bend it around when you need to, when people have critiques. Like using the word simple, using the word good, and then when someone's like, wait, this is an example of God not being good, then you say, oh, well, good means, this, or we don't know what good means. It's like, how do you have an argument then?
Yeah.
For instance, if you say God is good, and like, what about all this evil in the world? And you say, well, it's hard to understand how, like, God's goodness. And you're like, so what does God is good mean if we don't understand what good means?
Yeah. It's built on false premises.
Yeah.
It's like it's like another thing I was saying earlier too, where it's like I feel like a lot of arguments for God, the house is built real solid. It's a sturdy, strong house, but it's built up on these pillars that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
The underlying assumptions aren't true.
Yeah, like the conclusion follows from the premises a lot of the time, but the premises themselves are very suspect. They're just, they're not based in reality, or they're not like experimentally or like observationally true. So we'll just run down some fallacies. That was the ambiguity one. There's another one that is the burden of proof fallacy, which a lot of religious people use, where they claim that the burden of proof rests on the person trying to disprove a thing.
Right.
Or trying to say the thing does not exist, rather than saying that the thing does exist. For instance, this is where Bertrand Russell's teapot comes in. It's like, it's ridiculous to say that I believe there is a teapot that is orbiting the sun right now, and we just can't see it. And the burden of proof is on you to disprove me. No, the burden of proof is on me to come up with some evidence of the thing that I'm claiming exists.
Exactly. Because it's like, and the reason why, because it's like, you could bring up like, well, if I claim, for example, that the refrigerator doesn't exist, you know, and you tell me the burden, and I say the burden of proof's on you to prove it, like, well, you actually can't prove it. You can be like, well, see, we can touch it, we can feel it, and obviously we can't know these things, right, because our senses are fallible. But that aside, right, you can more or less provide some type of tangible evidence to prove that the refrigerator exists. However, with God, there is no evidence.
Right.
And so you can keep trying to prove it, but there is no...
Yeah. It's like Hitchens' razor. Things like, what is it? Like things that can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Right, exactly. That's good.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. That's
really?
Good.
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens, he would use that a lot. That's why they call it Hitchens' razor, like Occam's razor.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're trying to claim that a thing exists, then it's up to you to provide evidence that it does. And I mean, a lot of the logical arguments try to show evidence, but it's not actually. It's like what we were just talking about, the logic only evidence, like contorting logic, trying to think that you can like think something into existence, which that relates to Anselm's Ontological Argument, which we'll get to shortly in a few minutes. So another fallacy is the appeal to emotion. These are common in religious belief a lot. Something feels good, or something makes you like happy, or staves off your anxiety or dread or fear, and therefore it's true.
Right.
That's the fallacy. The fact that you feel good about something speaks nothing of its truth value.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a number of issues with that. Obviously, there's what do we mean by feels good, and I mean, obviously, like there's like the clear objection, right, that just because something feels good does not make it true, you know. But then also, if you explore the idea of feels good, then that brings into questions of like rape, like if sex feels good, that doesn't justify rape,
right? Or
if you're like a psychopath and killing people feels good, that doesn't make it right, that doesn't make it good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think those are slightly unrelated, because you've got what feels good versus what is morally right, and what feels good versus what is true. Obviously rape is true. Rape happens. I mean, it doesn't even mean anything to say that rape is true, but
yeah, I was gonna say that yeah.
I'm just saying, like the fact that it happens, it
exists.
Fact. Yeah,
right.
But yeah, something's feeling good neither proves that it's morally good, or proves that it is.
Yeah, I think,
true.
And I think even if something is morally good, I don't even know. Well, I was gonna say I don't think anything being morally good
proves that it's true.
Proves that it's true, but then I realized I should probably follow that up with some like an example or some evidence.
And you didn't have any?
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would off the top of my head say that just because something's morally true doesn't mean or morally good doesn't mean it's true either. So another fallacy is the bandwagon, which is a lot of people believe a thing, therefore it's true. Which, no matter how many people believe that Band-Aids are good for your digestive health, doesn't mean they actually are, and you shouldn't eat Band-Aids.
Right.
Even if you've got an entire culture that believes that the position of the stars in the sky on the day you were born means anything about your personality, doesn't mean it does mean something about your personality.
Right.
Another fallacy is the no true Scotsman, which is also kind of like changing the rules of the argument after the fact when somebody critiques it. Like this one comes up sometimes, just in general argument. You say that, gamers aren't interested in mobile games. And you're like, I'm interested in mobile games and I'm a gamer. Well, no true gamer is interested in mobile games.
Right.
So you're not a real gamer.
It's sort of that purity test.
Yeah.
To be a part of the club.
Right. And sometimes that's used as a defense from atheist arguments. Like people are like, well, no real Christian believes that.
Right. Well, it's like
I know a lot of Christians who believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just like making a basis claim.
Right.
Yeah.
Another one is the black or white fallacy, which I'm sure everyone's used to, is when it's like a false dichotomy. Yeah. When you're saying that one or the other thing must be true when there are more options than just that.
It's like Pascal's wager is a false dichotomy.
Yes. Pascal's wager is a good example of a false dichotomy. There is the special pleading, which happens in like every religious argument almost, especially like the Kalam cosmological argument. Special pleading is when you make exceptions for a thing in order to make that thing true.
Oh yeah, so that's essentially what the pudding fallacy is then.
I think the pudding fallacy is mostly ambiguity.
I think the pudding fallacy is maybe a combination though, because you're being intentionally ambiguous, but you're also, you're freely changing definitions and changing the rules so that it's non-falsifiable.
Yeah. I mean, that's also kind of like maybe a little bit no true Scotsman, changing the rules of the thing during that conversation. Moving the goalpost, as they say. There's false cause fallacy, which is mixing correlation with causality. Just because two things are connected doesn't mean one thing causes another thing.
Right.
That comes up sometimes. There is the personal incredulity fallacy, which is very common, especially when people are arguing against evolution. Personal incredulity, or the bigger bucket category it fits into, is argument from ignorance. Personal incredulity is, I don't personally understand how a thing works or makes any sense. Right. Therefore, it does not make any sense.
Yeah.
Which is maybe a difficult one, because I think a lot of religious people claim that against atheists as well. Like, you don't understand Aquinas, so you're saying that Aquinas is wrong, but it's just you really don't understand what he's saying in his argument. So you have to be careful with that one, because it can be used against you. You have to make sure you do really understand the argument that you're arguing against.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are like, well, I mean, what? Was your grandma a monkey? No. Therefore, evolution is wrong. It's like, that's a straw man, actually, too. Straw man fallacy is misrepresenting the argument. You see Ken Ham doing that.
Yeah.
He has these, like, lectures or, like, teachings where he gets a group of impressionable young children, and then he has a projector slide of you, or, like, a little kid, and then your mom, and then your dad, and then a monkey. And he's like, does this make any sense? And it's like, no, but that's also not what evolution is.
Yeah. He's straw manning. Exactly. Yeah. So straw manning is almost like sort of like the other side of the personal incredulity fallacy.
Yeah, I think they're related, because I feel like if you're using a personal incredulity argument, a lot of the times you're also using a straw man.
Yeah, I had this other thought too relating to the personal incredulity argument, and I'm not sure really where it fits in here, but I was just thinking about how, with like the question of God, it's one of those things where, or like the origins of the universe, where we don't know the origins of the universe. The only difference is theists are claiming to know.
Yes.
It goes back to what I was saying before about the house on stilts, or like the support beams, right? Where religious people are claiming that the support beams of the house are made out of wood, like they're invisible, right?
They're made out of God.
Right. Yeah. Wood is God, right? So they're claiming that the supports of the house are made out of wood, and I'm claiming I don't know what it's made out of because I can't see it,
Yeah, there's like some things that we kind of have to remain agnostic about. Like,
exactly.
I mean, we can trace back math through time and the inflation of the universe through time to come to the Big Bang, but we can't claim that we know right now yet what caused the Big Bang, or if anything came before the Big Bang. There's lots of possibilities. It's possible that there was a previous universe that collapsed, and then the Big Bang is the next, the universe's rebirth. Could be that something came from nothing. Could be that God created it. Could be a number of things. We don't know. So it is not logical. It's not like honest of us to claim that we do know these things.
Yeah, exactly.
To come up with an answer where we legitimately don't have the answer yet. You have to just admit that you don't have the answer. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of religious people and religious arguments are uncomfortable with, is admitting ignorance. Like, even when you use an appeal to ignorance, you're trying to put in an answer there. Say, I don't know how this works, therefore God did it. You're still trying to think of an answer.
Yeah, that's one of those things that always frustrates me too. Is
you can't just leave it alone at the ignorance part.
Right, because it's like with the whole the unmoved mover idea, right, where everything in motion has a cause, right? The universe is in motion, therefore the universe must have a cause. God is that cause, right? But that assumes that God has no cause,
right?
And it's like,
which is special pleading.
Yeah, you're just arbitrarily choosing. Well, this is God. Then this is the start line. Either you believe in infinite regress or you don't. And if you don't believe in infinite regress, first off, how are you deciding where God is and why are we calling it God? Why can't it just be the Big Bang, for example, right? Like if obviously we don't know that the Big Bang is the origin, but it's a possible origin, and why do we have to call that God? You're just inserting God for what? Like for fun? Like...
Yeah, there's this phrase that's like a conclusion is just a spot where you decide to stop thinking.
Yeah.
Because you can always go deeper.
Exactly.
So when you're claiming that God is the answer, it's not that like the final answer is God. It's that you just don't want to think about the problem anymore. And then you're using that as like, you're just saying your special pleading, saying like, God doesn't have a cause, so therefore I solved it. Don't have to think about that issue anymore. There's no infinite regress. It's just that God did it, but that's not an explanation of the mechanics of things. Like, what created God? How did God do it? Why does God not need a cause?
Yeah, you have no reason to just decide.
Right.
Like you're making a claim with no base.
Yeah. So, we got false cause, appeal to emotion, personal incredulity, special pleading, burden of proof, ambiguity, bandwagon, no true Scotsman, black or white. And there's also begging the question, which is when you make a circular argument. When you include the conclusion in your premise, you assume, this happens a lot, especially like in C.S. Lewis's arguments, you assume in your very first conclusion, you presuppose that God exists, and then you go on to prove why God exists. It's like, no, you have to start from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
You have to bring in other things. Like you have to bring in evidence from other areas. You can't use your own conclusion as the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think... Descartes sort of does that too in his meditations.
Yes.
Because he's talking about like, he knows he exists for sure, right? Or he knows that he at least exists.
I think therefore I am.
Yeah, I think therefore I am. Right, exactly. But then he also just says that God must exist.
Right.
Why?
Well, he thinks that it's because he has that I think therefore I am is a clear and distinct idea. And those would not be possible unless God existed, because God is not a deceiver. He wouldn't let us have these so-called clear and distinct ideas.
And again, this is what you were talking about before too, where it's like your conclusion is only your conclusion because you decided to stop thinking about it. It's like, okay, well, where did like Descartes just choosing not to think about, first off, how he knows God is not a deceiver, and
right, God could very well be a deceiver,
right, and how he knows that, like he's just assuming God. He goes, well, I have these thoughts, and it must be God because God's not a deceiver. Well, wait a minute, you just threw God in here out of nowhere.
Right. What seems to be true in Descartes' case is that he was having a complete existential crisis and on the brink of suicide.
Oh, for sure.
And then he decided that God is what makes him feel good.
Yeah, I mean, and hey, if that's what makes you feel good, then like
that's what keeps him from going absolutely insane.
Yeah, if that's what then take that, but I think that's a band-aid to the deeper problem.
Right. And like I've had those moments before too, where I was going absolutely insane, like, why does anything exist? How do I know I'm real? But I haven't used God to solve that issue.
That's the thing. Like people can use God for that, and that's fine. But it's not. Well, I
might disagree with you that it's fine. But...
Well, here, let me asterisk that, and let me explain. So, it's fine short term, right? Like if you right now, right, are standing on like the edge of a building, right, you're contemplating suicide, okay, and all of a sudden you're like, but wait, God must be real. Like somehow you have some sort of religious awakening and you decide not to kill yourself. Yeah. Short term, I 100% advocate for that. If that's what stops you from killing yourself, then do it. However, there's underlying issues that need to be addressed after you're no longer feeling suicidal that can be solved and should be solved without religion, right? Because obviously religion has a number of problems that we get into later, right? But I think short term, if it's the only thing that's going to stop you from doing something stupid like killing yourself or committing some sort of heinous crime, then latch onto that. But it's not a good long-term solution. So that's what I think. I think it's fine if it's in literally the circumstance of either you're using religion as a philosophy, fine, but just don't take all of it because like some of it's like stupid and bad. You know, like oppressing women is probably not good. Yeah. But like,
I'm not sure.
You don't think so? Like, you think if someone's going to kill themselves and having a religious revelation is what's going to stop them, you think that that's bad still?
Yeah, maybe not to the extent that they should just kill themselves, but
I'm going to create a dichotomy here. This is the dichotomy.
Religion perpetuates itself based off of these things.
Yeah.
Fear of death and fear of meaninglessness.
Mm-hmm. Well, fear perpetuates a lot of things.
Yeah. So it's like if you have that sort of like existential crisis and then you turn to religion, those answers that you turn to during a crisis like that, I feel like are very hard to undo because they're like foundational to your mental stability.
Okay. True.
So I feel like if you choose religion in the short term to get over your problems, you're probably going to also be choosing in the long term too.
Yeah, but I think though, like obviously, if it's possible, if I have any say, if I can stick my hand into this scenario, right, into this situation, if I can make it so that this person makes a secular, has sort of an awakening where they make a decision based on like, not based on religion, right? That stops them from killing themselves. Obviously, I'm going to prefer that, right? Because religion causes a lot of harm otherwise.
Yeah, but you're saying if that's not possible.
Yeah, like if it's like they're on the bridge, right? And like say like, I don't know, like they see a church in the distance and they're like, oh, God. Love that guy, you know?
Yeah.
Or that, whatever.
Chap.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's what's going to stop, like, I think that they should take it, right? And because I value life, I think that I would prefer this person be religious
than
have them be dead. I don't want to kill all religious people.
Well, no, I don't want to kill them.
I prefer that they're not religious.
So you're saying you value life more than you value truth?
Ooh, that's a good question. So see, I'm going to pause for a minute because I need to consider this. I guess, I think maybe you're presenting a false dichotomy, potentially, unintentionally. Because I think that I'm not necessarily saying I value life over truth. Like I sort of am. I
think maybe you're presenting the false dichotomy and I'm going along with it. Because you're saying they only can do either suicide or go religious.
Well, because it's a hypothetical.
I know.
It's like
so in this hypothetical, you prefer life over truth. It's not a hypothetical that actually is strictly related to reality.
Yeah. So I guess I prefer life over truth in this hypothetical scenario.
Yeah.
Mostly though because I don't think that this person is going to be responsible for like, a second crusade. If that is the case, and I can know that preemptively, I would rather them just fall off the building.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I have some conflicted thoughts on suicide.
Okay.
Where I'm not entirely sure if I'd prefer them not to kill themselves.
Really?
Because I think people should have the right to kill themselves.
Well, they should have the right to kill themselves, obviously. Like, I think the idea that suicide's illegal is stupid. And kind of silly, frankly. Because it's like, if someone's dead, like...
What are you going to do? Put them in prison?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Condemn them at the funeral.
Yeah.
No, people obviously have the right to kill themselves.
I mean, here's what you could do. And here's the punishment. That it wouldn't be for them necessarily, but it would deter suicide, which I guess is the point of our justice system, is you could take all of their assets and their money so that it doesn't actually go to anyone in their will because they're a criminal.
Yeah, but that's awful.
It is.
Yeah, so here I have a better formulated thought on suicide now.
Okay.
Now that I've thought about it for a second, is I dislike suicide in the sense that like I prefer people not kill themselves because in my ideal world we would have adequate services for people that this person could, because obviously people want to kill themselves because they're miserable, right? That is why you kill yourself. You don't kill yourself because you're having a good time in life, right? And so I would rather just make this person's life better than have them kill themselves and, just to fuck off.
I don't know if that's necessarily true that they kill themselves because they're miserable. I'm sure many people do. But I think like that existential problem, like the Descartes problem of like, do I exist? It's maybe you could try to pin that to misery, but I think it's more like...
Well, I guess I don't even know, like, because I've never experienced that an existential threat so bad that I've like thought like, what's the point of even existing?
Yeah.
And so because I haven't, like, while I've never been depressed and suicidal, because I've been sad to varying extents, I can understand the idea of someone being so miserable that they would consider and act upon suicide. However, I can't fathom someone being like, oh, nothing actually matters. Why am I even here? I'm going to kill myself, because that's like so not how my train of thought on that goes. So maybe I'm just having a hard time putting myself in those shoes.
My suicidal ideations, whenever I have them, aren't out of a misery. It's more out of like the suspicion that I might actually be dreaming right now and I want to wake up. Like,
right. But it's like, but right? Okay, so from what we know about dreams,
or like maybe I should, maybe not that I want to wake up, but that like it's responsible of me to wake up. For instance.
But why? You're just sleeping.
No, well, okay. This is the hypothetical scenario that I think could be true. Obviously, I don't think it is true in the sense that a religious person thinks God is true. I'm not gonna base my life actions upon it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a small suspicion that I have sometimes.
Right.
Is that perhaps real me, higher dimensional me, whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
say, is like on heroin right now.
Right.
And this is my heroin experience.
Right.
And I am like forsaking the responsibility of my real life. And right now I'm like in some bed and someone's trying to like, Wade, wake up. Like, come on, you got to do stuff with your life. Don't just sit here and waste it all. And this is my inner reality, my inner universe that I've constructed for myself. And I'm like using it as an escape for my real life.
Yeah, but I think almost what you're doing though is you're almost walking that line though of like the 50-50 agnostic, right, where you're, because if you were to contemplate like if you were to give that so much weight that you would contemplate suicide over it, that's almost giving it equal weight, which I think isn't true, because for one, if heroin's supposed to be a really good experience and life is life, this is some disappointing heroin. Like like this is like some fucking street heroin. Like this is not good stuff, right? So you're either on some really bad heroin, okay, or like I think also too, it's one of those things where yes, it's possible that we're living in a dream or in a simulation or whatever, right, but it's not likely. So you shouldn't give it equal weight to the point where you should contemplate suicide. And further, even if you're on like unless you are for some reason paranoid that you're on some drug and this is like your OD, right? If you assume that it's some type of simulation or this is just like an acid trip or a dream or whatever, like so what? Because when your life here ends, your real life, if that exists, right? I mean, less time will have passed. Like it's not like it's like a 1-to-1 time scale.
Well, it might not be 1-to-1, but it might be 1 to something.
Right.
You know? It might be
maybe it's like 8 hours.
Yeah, or maybe it's a week, or maybe it's 30 years. You know, like it could be that I finally die in this reality and then I wake up and then someone's like, wow, you really just wasted your whole life. You've been sitting in this bed in this, simulation building for 45 years. Like you don't want to like do anything else.
Right. But see, here's the thing though, is right. Like if I wake up and find that out, I'm probably going to be pretty sad and upset. Yeah. Okay. But the likelihood that happens is low, right? And so I
haven't killed myself.
Yeah, and so because I would rather make the most of this experience. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. But I'm just saying there are some times more than others where I feel like it's true, especially like on acid or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that'll get you.
Yeah. So no, yeah, I definitely wouldn't put myself in the 50-50 like the whole Albert Camus
which is why
quote, or I think it's misquoted to him. He's like, should I get a cup of coffee or should I kill myself?
Right. That's really funny. No, I think though to tie this back in, right, because we were talking about why people commit suicide, right? Yeah. And so I think then I guess to conclude that then it's out of misery or ignorance. And I'm not trying to attack, people who have killed themselves, to be clear. What I'm saying is that because I think most people kill themselves because they're miserable, right? Or they have maybe some underlying mental illness, but I feel like that's also essentially misery. They're miserable, right? Or it's out of such an ignorance and like terrible logical like process that you recognize and think about how useless and pointless everything probably is, and you're like, well, I should just kill myself. Like if you're not able, like, because Wade and I just talked about it, right? And just revealed to each other how it's possible but not likely, and therefore you shouldn't kill yourself. So if you can't figure that out and you kill yourself, then it's out of ignorance.
Yeah, I guess related to ignorance, like out of this is the thing, like too, with a God belief, it's like out of like a need for certainty. Yeah. Like you kill yourself because you're suspicious of this reality, and you have a need to be certain. Like you don't know for certain whether you're real or not. So you want to know, so you kill yourself to find out.
That's almost like some extreme certainty though, because I think humans, like particularly religious humans, obviously, but humans generally have that tendency to need to be certain. Yeah. But I don't think anyone, like, or at least most people, don't have the they don't need to be certain that bad. They're not going to kill themselves. That's scary.
But I think it goes hand in hand with religious belief too. It's like a need to be certain, so you decide to just like say you're certain. Yeah. Decide to just believe that God exists, and then you can feel that certainty. As long it's like you're just fooling yourself into being certain.
Well, and that's what makes me so upset too about the idea of like instilling religious belief in children, is because what it does is when people become adults, is even if they get to a point where they're starting to question, and they're becoming a little agnostic, right? What you've done though is you have made religion such a foundational part of their developmental experience that imagining that such a big part of your life was a lie is kind of like, I mean, it's essentially like a heavily diluted version of like dying in this world and waking up and finding out it was all a dream.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, holy shit, it was all a lie. And that's really scary. And so some people, I think, just choose to live in denial.
Yeah. No, I certainly wish I wouldn't have been raised religiously.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably fucked me up in a few ways.
Yeah.
And everyone else who's been raised religiously too. I brought this up once before in the podcast, but I'll bring it up once again. Have you seen Boyhood?
No.
It's a great movie. They like follow a real life boy over 18 years.
Right.
However, I mean, in the movie, it's not him in real life. He's playing a role, but they just like he plays the role through the whole 18 years. You know what I mean? So they're following the story of a boy who's growing up.
So it's a real story.
No, that's the thing. It's a real boy actor who is growing up over the course of the movie.
So it took them 18 years.
It took them 18 years to make the movie.
Okay, but his life growing up is a story?
Is fictional.
Oh, okay, right. So
he plays a character.
So this boy from 0 to 18 plays a character of a fictional boy's life.
Yes.
I get it. Okay.
Yes, and other actors too.
All right.
Like the mom actor, the dad actor, his sister.
Jeez, dude, that's a big budget.
I don't. It's like a indie movie. There's no effects. It's just like it's like a coming of age film.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, still, it's a really big dedication to the movie.
Yeah.
Like every I don't know, a month every year, you've got to go film this movie that
that's
you've been in your whole life.
That's kind of crazy. Like, that's like a fun party fact. Like you're like 16, you're in high school, like, hey guys, I'm actually filming a movie right now, and they're like, oh, it's coming out in a few years.
Yeah, they probably never believe you. Like, right. You've been saying this for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so Boyhood.
Yeah, great movie. You should watch it. But there's this scene where he's like having a sleepover, not a sleepover. He's at his dad's house. His parents are divorced. He's at his dad's house, and he asks his dad, I think it's like if elves are real, because he's into like fantasy and Lord of the Rings and stuff, just as I was as a kid. And then his dad's like, no, elves aren't real. And the kid's like really sad about it because he had thought they were. And then his dad tries to cheer him up. He's like, but, the real world is way more incredible than you could ever believe. Like you can swim through a whale's veins. Like that's how big they are.
Really? Can you?
Yeah, like a blue whale.
That's incredible.
If blue whales are the biggest whales, I think they're.
Yeah, one of the big whale, right?
The biggest whale on Earth, you can swim through its veins. That's how wide they are.
That's incredible.
Or maybe arteries, whatever.
Yeah, it's probably mostly just like the main
Yeah, like ones by the
That's
heart.
impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, and the kid isn't. He's still disappointed that elves aren't real. Like the real life is never going to be good enough because he spent the first 10 years of his life believing in a fantasy.
Exactly.
And I think with religious belief, it's the same kind of thing. If you actually believe it, or maybe even if you don't, you've been raised in it for, I don't know, 10, 20 years before you stop believing in it. That like God exists and there's this guy, or maybe not guy, maybe concept or like force in the universe that cares personally about you and has a special place in eternity for you. And then to find out that that's not true.
Well, yeah, and it especially doesn't help too when, unfortunately, not all of it, right, but a lot of it is very fear-based too.
Yes.
Because so I, for example, right, like growing up, my parents always gave off the vibe to me that they were like maybe kind of religious, but we were by no means like active church attenders. Yeah. Like I've been to church less than 10 times in my life.
Really? I would go to church every week.
Yeah, no, and
sometimes
like
twice a week.
And my parents weren't even the ones where they would like just go to church on the holidays. It was more like they'd get into vibes, where sometimes we might go to church once or twice, and and my parents were divorced and it happened on both sides. It was really weird. So like I have like dabbled in the religious experience.
Witchcraft?
Yeah, but my girlfriend, for example, right, like grew up in like a very religious household. And so there's that fear factor, right? Yes. Where sometimes she says like, sometimes like she's very atheist, but sometimes she just like has those scary intrusive thoughts because it's drilled into you as a child.
Like what if you're going to go to hell?
Yeah, you're going to burn in hell. Like she said, like this sounds like trauma type stuff.
It is.
Like because she was talking about how like in middle school, when you first start questioning this stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Is she was like she would like be awake like all night thinking about like she would think about how maybe God isn't real, but then she'd be like worried that like God is hearing her thoughts, and so she'd be like in her head like apologizing, like, oh, I'm so sorry, God, like I don't think you're fake, whatever, because it's like so like sorry if I leaked this story, but yeah, like so it's like this sort of like fear-mongering like craziness going on in your head where you're constantly like you feel terror at the idea of not believing.
When I was a kid, I would feel like immense guilt after masturbating.
Really?
Like I had just assaulted God.
That's crazy. See, that sucks, dude.
And I was like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was weird because I don't think I've ever fully believed in God. but there was still like all this like social pressure and
Yeah.
like around it, like, you know, it's a sin to masturbate or like to be gay or whatever.
Right. Yeah, no, yeah. See, that's why that's another one of those things where it's like it's all like fear-mongering. You know, like they're trying to get you to like.
And that's the thing. If not anything else, I think religion and religious beliefs generally just cause intense psychological harm.
Yeah, like absent the Crusades.
And, even if that didn't happen,
and the real tangible harm that religious institutions
and like
cause.
honor killing your daughter in like Islamic countries, even if that doesn't happen, it's the psychological harm that it causes.
Yes, for sure.
From all the fear mongering.
Now, to be fair, I'm not even remotely well versed in every religion in existence, right? So I recognize that there is probably some religions out there.
Jainism seems like a pretty peaceful religion.
Oh, what's Jainism?
I don't know very well, but I know they're vegan.
Oh, so that's probably pretty cool. Yeah, so like there's some religions, I'm sure, that maybe don't even fearmonger. Like there's no such thing as a hell and all that stuff, and that's great. So we're talking strictly about the ones that do.
Yeah, like Judaism, I believe there's no hell concept.
I think with flying spaghetti monster, there's also no hell concept.
I feel like there should be, because it's supposed to be it's making fun of Christianity.
Yeah, but I think that
so shouldn't they have a equivalent of hell?
Yeah, but they're like more accepting. It's like the same way that like the Church of Satan's actually like a super chill institution.
But I mean, the Flying Spaghetti Monster isn't actually trying to be a real legitimate church.
Well, they're not.
They're a joke.
But I don't know. I don't know if there's a Satan in the Flying Spaghetti Monster church.
I mean, it's probably a food-based thing. That's like, what's the rival of spaghetti?
Lasagna.
I think it would have to be not noodles, because
Really?
they call him his noodly goodness.
That's really funny. Flying.
So some food that isn't noodles. Maybe it's a sandwich, hot dog.
I'm just gonna type in Flying Spaghetti Monster Devil.
I don't think you'll find anything.
They're called Pastafarians.
Oh yeah, the Pastafarians.
That's so funny. Yeah, I'm not seeing it immediately right now because a lot of the articles that come up about are the ones where like the Pastafarians and the Church of Satan have like some joint lawsuits with the Supreme Court. You know, in terms of like religious freedom.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. They are a joke, but they're trying to like take advantage of being quote unquote being a religion.
Yeah.
To get like just to expose the fact that we have fucked up in this country, in the U.S. We have fucked up laws and regulations around religious exemption.
Mm-hmm. I love that Pastafarianism.
Yeah,
that's
yeah, that's one of the books I've been meaning to buy and read. The Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'd like to read that when you're done.
So anyway, let's get on to the actual specific arguments for God's existence.
It's been a while.
So I think since we've mentioned it a few times now, we should probably start with Pascal's wager. To be honest, I don't know how many religious people truly use this, but I think when I argue, like, I mean, use this in their personal lives as their reason for believing in God. Mm-hmm. But I do know from personal experience that arguing with religious people, they bring this up. They use it to try to convince you that God exists. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying I don't know if they use it to convince themselves that God exists.
Right.
But it's one of the things they throw at you.
It's a recruiting tool.
Or like it's a debate tool against atheists.
Right.
When I don't know why they would ever think it is a good argument. But want to give us the Steelman version at the Pascal's wager?
Yeah, I will do my best. Yeah. So yeah, you can fill in any gaps. So basically, Pascal's wager states that it's essentially like a Punnett square, right? Where you have belief where God turns out to be real and belief where God turns out to be fake.
Yeah, so
you've got non-belief where God turns out to be fake and non-belief where God turns out to be real, right? And
you've got like the boxes. The x-axis could be like God exists, God doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Y-axis is you believe in God, you don't believe in God.
Yes, exactly.
So there's an overlap
of each of
the boxes.
And so it's like if you don't believe in God and God does not exist, nothing happens.
Yeah. If you die, and that's it.
And if you don't believe in God and God does exist, you burn in hell for eternity.
Yes.
Obviously, this applies to most of the Abrahamic religions. And then if you believe in God and
it applies to any God too, because you can find a version if you just type in Pascal's wager and like image search. You can find some people have made charts of like every religion.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
So you can see what would happen, right. How God would respond to your belief or non-belief.
Right. So then I guess for the sake of simplicity, I'm referring strictly to
and that's how it was originally put anyway.
Okay.
It was originally put in the context of Catholicism.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then so if you do believe in God and God doesn't exist, you've wasted a finite amount of time worshiping God your whole life, but that time is finite. Whereas if you do believe in God and God does exist, it's infinite reward.
Yes.
And so according to Pascal, Pascal.
Blaise Pascal.
The most logical choice to make then is the one where there is
to bet on God.
It is to bet on God, because it's either nothing happens or infinite reward, as opposed to nothing happening and infinite suffering.
Yeah.
So that's Pascal's wager.
Yes. There are a number of problems with it, though.
Yes.
One is that it's a black or white fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It paints the picture of one God existing. For instance, what if you follow Pascal's wager, and so you bet on God, but the God you bet on is the Christian God, and that God doesn't exist, but actually Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld, exists.
Mm-hmm.
He's not very happy that you dedicated your life to worshiping Yahweh.
Yeah, because a lot of religions, blasphemy receives an even worse punishment than simple non-belief does.
Yes.
And so you don't want to be blasphemous.
However, what's weird about that is that if you do look at the Pew surveys and stuff of attitudes towards other religions, say you're a Christian and they're trying to ask what your attitudes towards other religions are, it's always the case that they perceive atheists to be the least moral and worst people. And religions prefer each other over atheists.
Which is so funny, because according to most of their texts, at least all the mainstream ones that most people in the U.S. are
worshiping false gods is the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, blasphemy is worse than non-belief. So
but not in people's heads, I guess.
Yeah, well, I guess, when religion doesn't really hold up logically, you have to band together.
In the U.S., I believe there's Pew Research polls that show that people would rather have a Muslim president than an atheist president.
Really?
Which is surprising.
That I find hard to believe, post 9/11. I could see if you said,
Look that up for yourself, because I don't think I'm talking bullshit, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, could be wrong, but if that's true, honestly, that's unfortunate.
Not that Islam
to be clear,
is any worse than Christianity.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it is in practice, because it seems to be there's more violence due to it at the moment.
Right, yeah. I think the discussion of whether Muslim or Islam or Christianity is worse is a separate debate.
The caveat there is I'm saying Christianity is also bad.
Yeah, and I agree.
And I would much rather have an atheist president than any other religious president.
Oh, 100%.
But most people don't feel the same way, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one problem with Pascal's wager, is that it paints a false dichotomy of either God or no God, when there's a plethora of gods to choose from.
Right.
And if these gods are depicted as jealously as the Bible God is, then they would all punish you horribly for not believing in the right one. Mm-hmm. So then what's the safest bet then?
Right. And it's
because if you're going to be punished worse for believing in the wrong God than you would for not believing at all, then to minimize your punishment, because you're probably going to be wrong about what God you believe in, to minimize your punishment, you should probably believe in no God at all. You're still going to get punished, but you'll be punished the minimum possible.
Right. Or, no, I was going to suggest worshiping all religions, but that almost seems the same.
Oh, this is another problem. I think worshiping all religions is the same issue as believing in God because of Pascal's wager in the first place.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because would a God that wants you to believe in him really respect you and reward you for believing him based off of a gamble? This doesn't seem like real faith. It seems like a calculated measure.
That's true, yeah, because according to Kierkegaard, faith is supposed to be beyond reason. And so reason not only can't be considered in faith, but shouldn't.
Right.
Kierkegaard.
It's like motivated by, rather than actual legitimate belief in a thing, it's motivated by the reward that you're going to get because of it.
Yeah, right. And so it's
if you're
selfish. Yeah. That almost seems like that. Isn't that a sin?
It seems like God would like you worse for doing that. If this God is...
But then again, now we're just simply postulating about what God would prefer, which frankly we can't know.
We can't know that, but if we're going to be going off of the idea of God, that he's wants us to worship him, and that other people seem to believe that you need to just worship him despite reason, then it seems like that type of God wouldn't respond very well to your calculated quote unquote faith.
Right.
You posing as a person who believes in God just for your gamble. And then on the same side, if you try to worship all gods, they'll probably see through your act. Yeah. And then there's another argument against Pascal's wager that goes that if God really is the good kind of guy that we think of it, him, she as, you would think then, I mean, obviously we can't know, but you would think that this type of God would prefer an honest atheist to a dishonest theist.
Right.
To somebody who's using Pascal's wager to get their way into heaven over somebody who legitimately doesn't believe because they didn't see a good reason to.
Well, yeah, and again, too, that almost for me, that sort of shows the circularity of arguing for religion generally, right? Because I feel like, and it's fine if you think one and not the other, but I think for many people arguing for religion, they'll use all of the logical arguments available, including Kierkegaard and including Pascal's wager.
Yeah, and some of them are like contradictory with each other.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is Kierkegaard claiming that faith is beyond reason, and Pascal's wager don't work. So it's like a lot of times, like if you can fight your way through Pascal's wager, right? And someone says, okay, so maybe Pascal's wager isn't a good argument.
Then they use a new argument.
Yeah, and then so now you're jumping to Kierkegaard where you're saying, well, faith is beyond reason anyways, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's like, so then your whole Pascal's wager thing was just disingenuous. Because now you're saying something completely different.
And that goes back into what you were saying at the beginning of presenting Pascal's wager, where you in your experience, you find it's often Pascal's wager is presented as to atheists as a reason to believe, rather than a stated reason for belief,
right,
that religious people hold.
Yes, because they know it's disingenuous.
Yeah, and so it's like they're just trying to pull a fast one on you. Like, you don't actually believe because it doesn't work.
Yeah, they just watched a YouTube video of what to respond to atheists, and they went with all, like, just bombard you with all these different arguments when, one, the arguments aren't good, and two, the arguments actually don't work with each other.
Together, yeah. Because, they have to, I think they have to work together to work, because you can't get there by different routes, and then they can't coexist. I could be wrong. I mean, I could be wrong there.
It depends on the argument. Like, you could use two different arguments to put forth a thing, as long as the arguments, if you could put them side by side, they
and that's what
mesh.
I'm wondering, and this might not be important, but because in this case I think I can definitively say that those can't coexist. But I guess what I'm wondering, is there ever a situation where two arguments can reach the same conclusion, but those two arguments can't coexist? I think they always have to coexist, but I could be wrong.
Two arguments that reach the same place but disagree with each other, or like in
I think they have to agree with each other. I think they have to be able to exist within the same universe.
What do you mean by same universe?
Like in the sense they have to follow the same logic.
Follow the same rules.
Yeah. Like you can't say you can't
say that faith and logic are different from each other,
right? And then try to prove faith by logic, right. Like that.
Yeah.
That's different, playing fields,
right? Yeah, if you're going to use Kierkegaard's logic, or Kierkegaard's quote unquote logic,
right,
you can't use any argument for God,
right?
Because no argument is worth pursuing. Arguing itself is unfaithful.
I don't think we actually defined Kierkegaard's logic, so maybe we should quickly cover that.
How about we can do that one? I feel like you have anything else to say about Pascal's wager?
No. Certified debunked.
It is a particularly weak argument, I'll admit. I think most theists would also admit that.
Mm-hmm.
However, I see people use it. Maybe not the most intelligent theists, but people on the internet that believe in God do use it sometimes. So there's that. Kierkegaard's leap into faith, though.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead with that one?
Explain this one. All right. So Kierkegaard's. Now, I'm probably going to miss something because we've been talking about one specific element of it, but essentially Kierkegaard is arguing that faith is beyond or above reason, right? You can't prove faith, because faith by definition is believing without reason, right? It's blind belief.
Yeah, and jumping into the absurd.
Yes, it's his leap into faith, right? And additionally, that you shouldn't try to prove faith with reason. And I think for that he uses more biblical examples, but generally the idea, right, is that faith is beyond reason, so therefore you cannot and should not try to prove faith with reason. You should simply just have it. As to why you should simply just have it, I don't remember what his...
I think it's probably an escape from nihilism.
Yeah.
He was talking about stuff during the existentialist times.
Yeah, because I think he was atheist most of his life. He only became religious towards the end. And
because it's about absurdism too, like the whole quasi-existentialist philosophy. So he thinks that the leap into faith is you should believe in God exactly because it is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Absurd in the different definition, the absurdist definition.
Could you provide the absurdist definition of absurd?
Let me look it up. All right, so this is my attempt at explaining absurdism, or the absurd. So I've actually pulled it up, but I'll add my own thoughts in as well. So the absurd refers to the conflict between the universe and the human mind. It's between the human tendency to seek inherent value and meaning in life, and the human inability to ever find it. So to us, it seems like the universe is purposeless and chaotic, and yet we strive for a meaning to be there.
Right.
Soren Kierkegaard chose to confront that crisis by just diving right into the absurdity and saying that there is meaning, despite the fact that we cannot find it. So believe because otherwise we'll be...
Because otherwise we don't know. So this again seems like that one
the
fallacy
certainty thing.
Yeah, where it's like, we don't know, so we're just going to make a God claim.
Yeah. Or like you have to believe in the absurdity of faith, otherwise you might be overcome with meaninglessness of existence.
Right. Which I don't think it's true. I think you can have meaning in existence without God.
Right.
Quite easily. Like, okay, so you can have meaning in life without God quite easily. Like, even if, because our existence in the universe generally, obviously, means nothing, right? We have no purpose, we have no meaning. However, what we can do is our own experience matters, at least to us, right?
So personal meaning.
Right, so we have personal meaning there. And additionally, most of us, obviously not my socio and psychopaths out there, I feel for you guys, but most of us care about what others' experiences are like, right? We have empathy, and
right.
we like doing good things. And so we can derive our experience here on Earth by maximizing the pleasure of our own experience while also trying to make it a better experience for others.
Right.
And so you can get meaning out of that, and there's no need for there to be like you can literally not think about anything going on outside of the Earth ever if you didn't want to, and live a perfectly meaningful life.
Yeah, it's less that meaning exists outside of us and is created by us.
Right, yeah, we create meaning. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, like with the empathy thing, it's just something that we have, I guess, inherent to our biology because we're a social species.
Right. Well, most of us do.
Right. As a general rule, we do. And we can't really change that very much. And we could ask some interesting questions about why that's the case and probably find some decent answers in the history of evolution. But rather than seeking meaning in some external that you've decided exists, you can just seek it internally.
Right.
And the fact that your brain is a natural machine maker or meaning maker.
Back to I think, therefore I am, right? Like Kierkegaard and Descartes too, they're inserting God.
Yeah.
They're inserting God to create meaning. Whereas when you just care about your and other people's experiences, I think, therefore I am. So my experience must be real, so I can prove that is real. And I can reasonably deduce that other people's experiences are mostly real. Or at the very least, I can know that I am perceiving other people's experiences. And as an empathetic being, that is real to me, right? And so everyone else in the world could be AI. They could be literally fucking robots.
It could be a solipsist reality.
But because I am I still perceive their happiness and their sadness, I'm then going to care about it, because it's real to me.
And there's that way that other people's sadness can become your own too.
So. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, you could totally have a whole conversation too about the selfishness of altruism.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's this hypothetical scenario that I imagine. Obviously, I don't know, but it seems to me like you could do this study where if you had a person in a room filled with happy robots and the robots become sad, that person probably becomes sad too.
Right.
Like robots that like express themselves and like have smiles and faces and stuff, like robots that seem close enough to human. You can almost
do it through like a texting engine. You could have a person have text conversations with like 8 things that the person thinks are people. Like if they're having 8 different conversations, they're just AI.
Yeah.
But then the AI can choose to suddenly, portray sadness, and now I'm going to feel sad. I'm going to have empathy for what I think is a person.
Yeah. And then if they become sad, you'll probably become sad. And if they become sad, you'll probably want to make them happy. Exactly. Maybe just as a selfish way to make yourself happy.
Right.
So in that way, if you do live in a solipsist reality, you should probably still treat the AI that you live around well.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Which is why that I think Kierkegaard's insertion of God is useless. Like you're inserting it for because you're lazy. Like he just seems to be inserting it for no reason.
Well, he's acknowledged that you can't do anything else but insert it. That's why I kind of appreciate Kierkegaard, because he's like the most honest of them all.
Yeah, no, he's honest. Right.
He's like, I can't give any logical argument to why God exists. Therefore,
which is also why it bugs me too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, in a way, it's annoying, but it's also like the most respectable God belief there is, because it's at least being honest.
Yeah, for sure. No, I can agree with that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just, that's another fallacy too. An argument from assertion. That's what that one is. just saying that A is true because A is true, and I don't have any reasons. Just I think it. I'm just going to claim that it's a truth, and ultimately that's what a circular argument boils down to. I think because you're including your conclusion in your premise, therefore you're just asserting that your conclusion is true.
Yes. Wait. So to conclude then with Kierkegaard's leap of faith, right? So Kierkegaard's leap of faith doesn't work, right? Because it's supposed to be in response to absurdism, right? That we don't understand the universe, right? And so it's a way for us to understand. But he's essentially just committing that fallacy of...
Right. Well, maybe a response to nihilism, and it's a form of absurdism.
Right. Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would say it doesn't work. Like, this general God belief thing, I feel like it doesn't work because you have no evidence. You have no external reason to believe that this thing is true.
Right.
You have no, like, outside basis for the logic you're using. I mean, he's not even using logic in this case.
Yeah. I mean, he's and that's what we respect. He's strictly acknowledging that he is not using logic, nor will he attempt to.
Because with like a leap into logicless faith, you could use that for literally anything.
Exactly. And so it doesn't make it true, but I mean, I respect. And
ultimately,
honesty.
it is an appeal to emotion too, because he's saying this perceived meaninglessness of existence is making me so
that's emotionally distressful. Yeah,
that I need to believe in God in order to make sense of the world.
Exactly. And that almost seems like it's a false dichotomy, because it's saying that I can either be sad and upset or believe in God, when you can be not sad and upset and be an atheist.
You can also be sad and upset and believe in God.
Yeah, you can. People are.
Although maybe sad and upset is too light a term. It's more like completely overcome with the absolute
existential dread,
meaninglessness of everything ever.
Yeah. Which sucks, probably.
You haven't experienced this yet?
No. But I think it's because it's because like what I said earlier, like I don't care if it's all made up. It seems real to me, and so I'm making, like, I have meaning in life, and I'm fine with that. Like, literally, if, like, because I mean, we've had this conversation before too, which is maybe for another podcast, but if this was a simulation, would you want to know, and when?
Right.
And there's a number of details that have to be accounted for there, but
yeah. Would you leave it?
Yeah.
If you could. I would want to know, and I would want to leave it. Depending on the circumstances of the outside world, I guess. Yeah,
okay. If you want me to answer this. So, like, I think it would entirely depend. It depends on, like, the time ratio, I think. Right. Like, how much time in this life is in that life. Because I think it's dependent on a lot of variables. And if you say it's just between, like, do you want to know? Like, it doesn't matter. I'm not telling you anything. It's like, do you want to know if you're in a simulation right now? I think I would probably say no. Because I know for certain that this feels real, And, like, I could be, like, because the outcome could be happy, right? I could wake up right now and be like, oh, it's only been 30 minutes, but if you would have lived your whole life, you would have lost most of your life out here. I'd have been like, man, I'm really glad I did that, right? But chances are nothing's going to happen, or I'm going to wake up and it'll have only been a short period of time. And so I guess it just seems like there's more positive or neutral outcomes to just existing in the simulation until I die in the simulation than there are to find out if it's a simulation now.
Right. There's more to say on that simulation topic, but let's get into more of these arguments for God's existence. So this is a big one that people love to use, the Kalam Cosmological Argument.
Oh, yeah. Which is, Do you want to explain that one?
You circled it on the thing.
Oh, I did circle it, didn't I?
I think it's yours.
All right, fine. All right, so the Kalam Cosmological Argument is, if I remember correctly, it's basically the idea of the unmoved mover, or is that different?
I think people might think they're different, but I don't see the difference.
They're more or less the same. Because I know doing research prior, they do have their differences, but more or less, from what I remember, the idea is, is it the unmoved mover? No, I'm second guessing myself.
It's essentially the unmoved mover.
Okay.
Here's the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Everything that exists, everything that begins, has a cause. The universe began to exist.
Right, okay, yeah.
Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Mm-hmm.
And then that cause must be God, is what they would say.
Right, which is, I think, problematic for a number of reasons.
And as Frank Turek likes to say, and other people too, this cause, God, is necessarily spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, perhaps most likely in their opinion, personal, and God. We call it God.
What do they mean by personal?
There's the personal God. God has a relationship with you.
No, he doesn't. No, they don't. I have no relationship with God. I think that obviously, I mean, and there's the obvious problem, right, which we addressed earlier, right, that you're just arbitrarily deciding that this essentially infinite regress, right, that everything must have a cause, right, things must have causes, the universe must have a cause, right, and now you're calling it God. Right. Why does it have to be God? It can be anything. Like, because I think it's reasonable, it's more reasonable to say that the universe must have a cause, but then to claim that that cause is God is sort of a leap without reason.
I think they would say that whatever caused the universe to begin must by definition be God. But I think there's other problems with this.
Yeah, well, there definitely is.
Yeah.
That's the first one that comes to my mind, but you can go ahead.
Right. I think one of the problems is that when people claim that it must be God and God must have all these divine attributes, I don't think they're arguing well. For instance, these attributes, God could have had different ones.
Mm-hmm.
God doesn't have to be good. He could have been an evil God that created the universe. Why not?
Yeah, that seems arbitrary.
But I think one of the big problems is that, yes, there's that infinite regress. The argument is making the claim that infinite regresses don't exist, like they can't exist. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that. There might not be reason to conclude that they 100% do exist, but I think with our information right now, it seems that the universe, if we trace it back all the way through time, either went on forever or started at some point, but we don't know which it was.
Mm-hmm.
We can't claim that there's no way it went on forever.
Yeah.
It could be an infinite cycle that has always existed.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is when you say that God started it and God is eternal, you're at least saying that it's possible for something to exist forever.
Mm-hmm.
So if something exists forever, why can't it be the universe itself that's doing it?
Yeah. Again, it's like they're inserting God.
It's special pleading also because it's saying that everything has a cause except God. God doesn't need a cause.
Mm-hmm.
But why not? I thought everything needs a cause. Yeah. And then usually it's like, oh, well, God isn't a thing.
Right. And it's like
so
one of those things too where it's like it's non-falsifiable and like because they can say definitionally it's what God is.
Yeah.
But it's like
if you define God as
God
something
is
you
a
can
term
make,
that we made up because it's like
right.
in the same way that I could say that the definition, like say because if I come up with a special name for invisible cats,
right.
Whatever I call them, and within that definition I include right that and I essentially describe an infinite being that's like outside of like the constraints of time and all this other stuff, then it's you can't falsify that because it's by definition what it is, but you just made up the definition.
Right. Yeah, this isn't quite it, but it's somewhere in the vicinity. If I claim that the definition of God is this chair right next to me, then God exists. Right. My definition of God sucks.
Right. Exactly.
But so does Frank Turek's definition of God.
Yeah, and it's like, then it's like, okay, well, which definition are you pointing to? Like, well, the Merriam-Webster definition of God, but then again, humans create dictionaries. Like we created language, so we decided what the definition of God is.
Yeah. And
so it's like you can't prove something because that's what its definition is.
Right. It's trying to use logic alone to prove that something exists.
Yeah.
Trying to use thinking to prove that something exists outside of your thoughts. Which I think maybe this calls for a quick delve into Anselm's ontological argument.
Sure.
But so Anselm's ontological argument, and then we can go back to the Kalam thing if we have more to say. The ontological argument is that God is the thing that nothing can be conceived of that is better, that is more perfect than God is. So by definition, God is the very most perfect thing. So something that exists in your mind is not as perfect. It's inferior to something that exists in reality. Therefore, if God only exists in your mind, he's not perfect because he would be more perfect if he existed in reality. Therefore, God exists in reality because that's the maximum perfect thing you can find. So you're only using your own logic. You're not taking any external input from the real world,
right?
And you're coming up with God existence out of it.
And why is God perfect?
Right. And also, it's like why is something like it's a assertion claim,
right?
That something that exists in the real world is more perfect than something that exists only in your mind.
Well, and further, like just because you can think it doesn't mean it's real.
Right. I mean, that's the whole point. Like, just because you can think something doesn't mean it's real. You need to have evidence of a thing.
Yeah.
You need to have some sort of observational input from the world.
Mm-hmm.
And to say that all things have a cause with the cosmological argument, it's possibly true. It's also possibly not true.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just put your foot on one side and say that, yeah, this is the truth.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because you can either... Because I think you can only either claim infinite regress or not claim infinite regress. Like, you can claim... Yeah, because what they're doing is they're claiming infinite regress except God.
Right.
And they're saying, well, it's by definition that's what God is. But then it's like, yeah, but that doesn't prove God.
You're only coming up with this definition of God to stop having to think about this issue.
Right, exactly.
Which seems like it's a unsolvable issue, really.
Right.
Because if everything needs a cause, let's say that's true.
Uh-huh.
God needs a cause too.
Mm-hmm.
Everything needs a cause.
And it seems if we have infinite regress,
so you think
that begs the question of time. Yeah, no, there's big questions of time here too that I don't know if I'm equipped to address verbally. Like, I'd have to be writing to like keep my thoughts in order.
Well,
but
so yeah, I mean, it seems to be that everything, if everything really does require a cause,
right,
then these causes would have to go back forever, and that would be an infinite regress.
Right. And
then at some point, it needs to be some sort of chain of causes where there is no actual beginning. A past cause causes a past cause, and on it goes.
Right.
This is the way that kind of annoys me, this cosmological argument and religious thinking, is they get so upset about the idea of something coming from nothing. Because some people go that route of whether you're atheist or theist or whatnot. Say, like, maybe the Big Bang, it just popped into existence.
Mm-hmm.
That's potentially plausible. I don't know. But they're like, atheists believe something came from nothing. It's like, but what about God, though? Where did God come from?
It's the same thing.
I know. You're just placing God as a roadblock there to say that, oh no, there are no steps behind this, but really there are. Either way, it's like either the universe itself came from nothing or God came from nothing. Or the universe itself always existed or God always existed.
Yeah.
Something always existed or came from nothing, no matter what.
Yeah.
God doesn't help solve the answer or solve the question.
Yeah. That's it.
And then since I brought up the Anselm's ontological argument as well, and I finished that one off, there's no reason to believe that something existing makes it more perfect than it not existing. For instance, my memories are much better than the actual events that my memories are based off of. It seems like something in my mind is more perfect than something not in my mind.
See, I was looking at it from an idea of perfection in the sense of accuracy rather than perfection and like happiness derived from the experience. Because that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
I mean, I don't know if the accuracy thing would...
Well, because when you're saying your memories are more perfect than the events...
Oh, no.
You're saying that in the sense that...
Yes. That's true. That's true. We should define perfect in that way. Because, yeah, my memories are not more perfect than the events and my accuracy of remembering them. They're definitely a lot worse. Mm-hmm. But as far as like the ideal event happening, your memories skew towards making it more and more ideal.
Yes. Skew towards the ideal, yeah.
And I think that's what he means by perfect for God, is that God is the ideal thing to exist.
Oh,
God, like,
okay.
The perfection of God is not some sort of measure of accuracy.
I thought you were saying God was perfect in the sense that God doesn't make mistakes.
This is the thing with the word perfect.
Yes.
It's used a lot in theological argument because it doesn't have a good, consistent definition.
Yeah, they love those
ambiguous terms.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Anselm means that God doesn't make mistakes, and that God is the very best thing possible, and the thing would be better if it existed in reality.
But Anselm doesn't have any reason to claim that God is the most perfect thing, other than God is just...
Well, he's saying that God by definition, like whatever the most perfect thing is, it is God.
But it's proof in the word, which the word was made up. So it's like...
Yes, it's not proof in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think there's equal reason to believe that things are more perfect when they're only in your mind. Mm-hmm. For instance, if you're trying to draw something or make a movie or make a song, your real life version of what you made is probably worse than how you imagined it to be.
Are you sure though if that's necessarily because I think maybe a more accurate equivalent to what Anselm's saying is that what you're imagining in your head is likely based off of some experienced reality, and that experienced reality is more perfect than what you are going to draw. So it's not that like...
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's maybe more that, and this is maybe an argument that people who like Anselm's argument would make, right? That what you're imagining in your mind is always less perfect, right? Because you're like, for example, like when you want to draw a picture of a tree, right? You're remembering a tree that you've seen in your life before. But
Yeah.
when you saw it the first time, that was the most perfect image of it. Anything that's in your mind is like less accurate.
Is that necessarily true though? Like, because you could draw something that you've never seen before, couldn't you?
I don't think so. What would you? I mean, you can draw things. Okay, yeah.
Or do you think you would be taking parts from other things that you have seen?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, because like obviously you can draw like a fantasy
Dragon.
scene. Yeah, that you obviously never seen before, but you've seen other
lizard.
people's interpretations of.
Well, I mean,
a dragon,
the very first time anyone drew a dragon,
right,
ever.
which is based off of that person's experience of seeing like lizards and birds, and so it's a culmination of things that we've already seen. And even the traits on it, like, oh, this eye is based off of an eye that I've seen somewhere. And
so then you're saying that true originality doesn't exist. Like you can't come up with something that didn't already exist before.
I think originality exists only in nature.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, originality in the mind doesn't exist.
Yeah, right. Because I mean, you can make like original songs, right? But all parts of it are not original. It's the combination of parts that are original.
Right.
So I think when people make original,
I had this
artwork,
discussion with Josie. Yeah.
Right.
Originality and perfection come up with God belief too. Yeah, Anselm is providing a definition of God that he just made up, and he's not using any real world input into his equation. Like if you don't put in a real world input into an equation, you can't get real world output.
Yeah, exactly. If it's all hypothetical, then
it still is all hypothetical in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
There might be another problem with Anselm's ontological argument as well that I don't remember.
Well, if you think of it, we can come back to it.
Yeah. Well, there's also Aquinas' unmoved mover, which is very similar, like we said, to the cosmological argument. And that one is essentially the same thing. Aquinas' 5 ways, like the first 3 of his ways are like the same argument, just worded differently. Like everything needs a cause.
It's been a while since I've read them.
Yeah. Oh, there's the argument from motion, the argument from causation.
Right. So there
has to be an original cause. There has to be an original thing. That's the unmoved mover. There has to be an original thing that put things into motion. The prime mover.
And so that argument sort of defeats itself because so let's say God is the motion setter for the universe, but if all things in existence must have a mover, who is God's mover?
Right. And then they wave away that problem by saying that God is the unmoved mover, just by making it so the definition of God requires that he does not need a movement.
And so it's again like you are creating the definitions and essentially the framing.
Right. And it's just like cosmological argument, unmoved mover, it's special pleading. It's changing the rules of how everything works in favor of God's existence.
Right.
Like either everything needs a mover or not. It's got to be consistent, and it isn't consistent in their arguments. Oh, there's an argument from contingency, which is the same thing basically, that we can't provide existence to ourselves. And then the other 2 are slightly different. They're about perfection and argument from intelligent design, which is a popular one.
Well, yeah, the argument from intelligent design kind of is probably a good segue into Paley's watchmaker problem.
Yeah, that's an example of the.
It's essentially the
design.
same.
Yeah,
just less detailed.
Do you want to describe that one?
Sure. So William Paley's watchmaker argument is essentially that if you are walking through the meadow and you stumble upon a gold watch laying in the ground, you know, obviously, that watch was made by someone. Nature didn't just create the watch and plop it in the grass. You don't have any proof. You didn't see anyone put the watch there. You didn't see the watch be constructed. The watch is just there, yet you know in your mind that obviously somebody created the watch. And furthermore, even if you pick up the watch and you look at it and it appears to be defective, say it's slow, or maybe it always is like the hour dial is stuck on 3, so it has its defects, it's not a perfect watch, you still know it was made by a loosely intelligent designer. They still made a watch. You don't know how to make a watch. And so that part of the watchmaker argument obviously is addressing the idea of that the world is not perfect, yet we still can apparently know that the world was made by intelligent design.
Is that part of the classical argument? Even if the watch is defective?
Yes. Okay. So in Paley's original story, from what I remember, the defective part is also included in there, and I might be missing a couple other elements, but that's essentially the gist of it, right? That due to certain characteristics of the watch, we can know that watch had an intelligent designer, but I don't, and so I might be unintentionally strawmanning this here. I might be missing some essential components. But that seems faulty to me because we know what the watch was made with intelligent design because we have the past lived experience of knowing that watches are man-made, right? Like, you grow up all your life knowing that, like, houses and watches and cars and all these things are made with intelligent design. So obviously, if you see that in nature, you're going to assume it was made by a maker, because all of our lives we've been told that that is who makes those. However, when you see a tree or a rock, you're like, oh yeah, that was made by nature, because that's what we are told and that's what we learn our whole lives. So to say that the universe must be made by intelligent design really only works if you grew up knowing or thinking you know that the universe was made through intelligent design. You know, like it seems like sort of a...
So you're saying it's relying on some sort of
it's relying on having
conclusion?
Yes, it's relying on having that prior knowledge of knowing that type of thing is generally made by way of intelligent design. Because it seems like essentially all he's arguing is that because it works, it must have intention behind it.
Well, it's also like teleological thing. Like there's a function to the watch. The watch tells time.
Right.
And if you look at nature, there seems to be a function to nature.
Right.
I don't know. Animals eat and breed and multiply, and trees grow large and soak in sunlight and water, and that's their function.
Yeah, but that seems silly.
So it's like, this watch has a function and it was made by a maker. This tree has a function and it was made by a maker.
But I feel like everything has a function.
Everything does have a function. That's why they think everything is made by God.
Right. It almost seems, again, it seems circular or something.
Well, I think it's definitely more of a persuasive argument before the theory of evolution ever came about.
Right.
Because it seems like, I mean, who could ever make something with a function?
Right. Well, especially back when they thought that animals were had gears inside.
Oh, like Descartes thought.
Yeah, didn't he used to cut open animals to try to find the cogs or something?
I mean, I don't think he literally thought animals were machines, but he thought animals were machines.
One of those old philosophers actually cut open some animals, man.
I mean, maybe it was after he cut up and then saw that there weren't any gears. But
right, that's when he had his crisis and he wrote his first Meditations.
No, that was after he dumped over a basket of apples.
Oh, yeah.
He had the idea that animals are basically just like AI, like robots. I mean, they're flesh robots.
Right.
And I think he was right, except humans are also flesh robots.
Right. Yeah. We're all that kind of goes into the whole the mind and body problem.
Right.
Right. Like we're all just flesh robots with a consciousness going on.
Yeah. So the watchmaker analogy, or the teleological argument from design in general, is overlooking the explanation of evolution. Things over time build up and get more complex. It's not so much that they had a function and they were having this end design, 4 billion years ago or whatever it is, 3 billion, something like that. The first plant organism didn't have in its hypothetical mind the goal of becoming a tree one day.
Well, and further too, I wonder with evolution, right? Because evolution is the idea that there's natural selection, right? That nature is constantly improving itself, right? Where certain species, many will have to die off, and certain ones will have to be given the opportunity to produce more so that they can adapt to their environment, right? But if Earth, for example, right, was created, why not just create everything with perfect compatibility, I guess, for lack of a better word, where they don't have to, evolution wouldn't be necessary, right? Because they all just know, oh yes, this animal eats this animal, or this animal eats this plant, and they all live, and there wouldn't be a need for evolution in a created Earth, I don't think.
I mean, there could be. God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah, well, again,
really know how he's gonna design the universe.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, but then
we don't know God's intentions,
right? And also the teleological thing is, kind of putting on a purpose onto things that don't necessarily have one. You're saying that if it's natural law theory, you're saying the function of sex is to have children. It's
explain to me the clitoris.
Right. There's also the function of pleasure.
Yeah.
Or it's not like things are leading to a conclusion necessarily. More just that things are happening.
Right. And another example too of imperfections, why do men have nipples? Because I understand, right, that we were that we start out as 2X chromosomes, right? So and because I think that's the scientific explanation for why men have nipples, is because we start out as 2X chromosomes and we just never get rid of our nipples when we become men. but I don't know.
With like evolution.
I don't think we used to nurse. I think it's just because. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a biologist, so maybe this is a field that I am just.
Oh yeah, just like
I don't have the information.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's not that we used to be women, and we used to have mammary glands,
Right.
but that the human zygote
Right.
undergoes a lot of its, like the DNA coding that's been going on
Yeah.
in humans, like is kind of writing itself during your little gestation
Yeah,
period.
I guess
so you grow a
nipples are,
tail
like,
and then it
early-
falls
yeah.
off. You grow a coat of hair and it falls
Yeah.
off.
So why don't? That's interesting. I'm surprised we don't lose our nipples.
I don't know. Maybe we will in a couple million years.
That'd be sweet. Actually, I remember seeing something on the Science Channel many years ago about how there was some study where they were looking at like rates. It's something super scientific that's totally like beyond my area, right? But basically, men are going to become less common, like obviously over a very long period of time, right? But essentially, like men will stop being born, and women will eventually like be able to like it essentially just be like a bunch of like women, like I don't know. It's okay. So
Like asexual, like they have. They
So the
self-impregnate?
problem with this is that this is from something I watched on the Science Channel when I was in like 7th grade, and it's like a fractured memory. So I can't for the life of me even begin to explain it. I just remember the conclusion being really funny that men would no longer be needed and exist.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the intelligent design argument depends on not understanding evolution.
Right.
And that like things that look like they're designed are the product of over very long periods of time, natural events, of things
exactly.
adapting to their environment in order
Mhm.
to suit their environment.
Right.
There's the analogy of the puddle. What's the guy who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy named?
Oh, my friend really likes that book.
I always forget this guy's name.
Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, that author who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he's like a comedian kind of guy. He's dead now, but he had this little bit that he would perform of a puddle that gains consciousness one day because it's a
Right.
story. And it looks around at its environment. It's like, wow, I fit into this crevasse that I'm in so nicely. It's
Mhm.
almost as if it was made for me to be in it.
Right. Right.
So because the puddle fits so nicely into its
Mhm.
hole that it's in, the puddle thinks that the hole was made for it.
Mm-hmm.
When really it just fits in because it's water and because things adapt nicely to their environment.
That's really good.
You know, a bird and a bush look like they're perfectly designed to commingle. The bird can like get right into where the seeds are and not prick
Mhm.
itself, where a human would prick itself,
Mm-hmm.
and then get the berries. Like, oh wow, that God made it just so that these two things, these species, could coexist.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's the fact that over thousands, hundreds, millions of years, this bird has adapted to take advantage of this bush and get the berry.
Right.
And everything, literally everything has done that. So everything seems like, oh, it works so well with what its
Mm-hmm.
apparent function is. But one, it created its function over time. And two, it got good at its function over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a misattribution of like why things work together well, right?
Yeah.
Like some say it's God, it's really evolution.
Right. And I think that there's also this need that's implicit in the watchmaker analogy for us to imagine God as ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We like to imagine God as basically being human or being a man-like person where we create things like a watch or a chair or whatever. So we think that whatever our conception of God is, he too is a tinkerer and he likes to create things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess if God is the creator of the universe, then he necessarily has to create things.
Right.
But still, there's
That's a good point that we like to like
we
personify.
anthropomorphize God
Yeah,
just like we do animals in Disney movies.
Mhm.
Like,
exactly.
if God does exist, there's no reason at all to think that he's like us. I mean, the Bible makes it obviously clear that we think he's like us. God
Right.
created man in his own image.
Which I think is indicative of the Bible being man-made.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's yet another reason to believe that the Bible is
Right.
not historical fact.
Mm-hmm.
I think another argument that is frequently used by like everyone that believes in God is the God of the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily one argument. It takes many forms, but the idea of it is that I don't know if there's even a way to steelman it, because I think it's more of it's not a thing people try to use as an argument. It's more like a way of thinking that is just fallacious thinking.
Yeah.
But basically it's like whenever there's something that is not yet scientifically explained,
Mm-hmm.
religiously thinking people attribute it to God.
Yeah.
just like the watchmaker. Before we had evolution,
Mhm.
people attribute the seeming intelligentness of the world's design to be actually an intelligent designer.
Mm-hmm.
And we attribute, if you're like an ancient Greek, you attribute the weather to Zeus.
Yeah. I mean, it's again just the idea of I can't explain this, and so it must be God.
Yes.
But
Basically the God of the gaps is a argument from ignorance or personal incredulity.
Right.
But you see this a lot now. And the thing it's called the God of the gaps because there are gaps in our knowledge, and people fill those gaps with God.
And that also kind of implies that eventually God would no longer.
Right. The gaps are lessening over time. So with the God of the gaps, it would seem like God will no longer be necessary for humans to believe in.
Which then, if that's the case, then God doesn't exist now. Although I suppose we're also assuming that they're saying that there's a finite amount of gaps, because if we assume
there could be an infinite
that gaps are infinite, then I suppose.
Or there could be a finite amount of gaps, or infinite, either way. But some of the gaps, or at least one of them, is not fillable.
Right. Yeah. One of them just is God.
Well, not that it's God, but one of them is something we can never know.
Right.
For instance,
no, but I mean like for religious people.
Right. It could be that one of them is God. And I think the clearest refuge of God inside of these gaps is the gap of what happens after death for human experience.
Yeah.
I was talking in episode like 10 or whatever with my friend Ian, we were talking about this. It seems like that's where people rely on the most, where even if all these other gaps of like how the natural world works are filled with actual scientific knowledge, like this is why rain exists and when it happens, and you don't have to rely on praying to God for your crops to get rained on.
Right.
But the gap that we will never be able to fill with knowledge is what happens to us after death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think from a certain way of thinking about it, maybe that's true. But I also think, why are you assuming that there's an experience after death?
Right.
Like,
yeah. No, because the way I've always looked at it is that there is no experience after death. Like our experience here is our infinity, right? Like there's no, like in the same way that there's no conception of before you, there's no conception of after you, but like almost more so, because we can at least pretend to conceive before us by way of like history, right?
Yeah.
But after us, it's like quite literally nothing.
Right. Yeah, it's I mean, it seems to me most obviously likely that when you die, the experience is the same as before you were born, which is to say no experience at all. However, the thing is about that, any religious person will say, or any spiritual or mystic person will say, like, I mean, you can't prove that. And I mean, I guess they're right.
Right. But
it is technically unfalsifiable because we don't have any sort of evidence from beyond death to show.
We have a little bit. Like it's pretty limited, but I know there is like the idea. I mean, if you at the least believe that consciousness is functioning within the brain,
right,
and that it is characterized by brain function. I mean, because we do know through like brain scans and stuff that like once you're dead, like once brain activity's done, like there's nothing happening up here.
Right. Yeah,
it's radio silence.
Yeah, even though we might be able to not like know, I guess, for certain, we do have more indications than not to believe that there is no experience after death. But then that depends on accepting that there is no such thing as mind-body duality.
Right. Well, and someone also argued too that like your consciousness is more of a essence rather than a function of the frontal lobe, and so it wouldn't make a difference if you're brain dead or not because your consciousness is just separate.
So maybe this is worth going into a little bit, the mind-body duality thing.
Yeah, and that's something where I think in the end it comes down to I don't claim to know and religious people do, right? Like, because with consciousness, I have no fucking idea what that is. Like, my best guess is that it's a culmination of the neurons firing in my frontal lobe that grant me intelligent thought. And I'm not going to claim or attempt to understand it beyond that. And I think that there's no evidence to suggest that I have some sort of bodiless soul floating around in my brain. Because if I claim that just because it seems so incredible and crazy, I think I'm being intellectually lazy. You know, like I don't know why this is happening, but it's pretty nuts. So I'm going to just say that it's my soul. You know, like it seems to be like the claiming of a soul seems to be similar to me to be the claiming of God, right? Where you're not because you don't know, you're inserting this fantastical explanation.
Yeah, I mean the two ideas are almost the same, God and the soul,
right?
Or they go hand in hand most of the time. People that I guess don't believe in God, but are still spiritual, believe in some sort of soul and eternal consciousness. And from my perspective, that seems almost the same as believing in God.
Right.
Yeah, but the mind-body duality is the belief that your body, your physical, biological body, and the process of your experience of consciousness are not actually connected. So that it is not your brain that is creating this experience of consciousness. It is just that there's this illusion that's what's happening, and the real thing that's happening is that there's this I don't know, people could put it lots of different ways, but maybe there's this plane of consciousness that exists separate from the real world. It's like an immaterial realm, and that's where consciousness comes in, and you have this experience of living in a body. Perhaps droplets of this consciousness spend some time in your body and then leave. Perhaps you go back to that plane of consciousness once you die. And there's the thought that's kind of intriguing to me, that there's a way of looking at the brain where it's not a creator of consciousness, but it's a receiver of consciousness, like a radio. Because
everyone's like brain is just tuned to a different dial. Yeah,
perhaps. Or yeah, that could be it. We all have. There's a general like radio signal that is consciousness itself, and then we're all tuned into a different wavelength of it.
Right.
So, which is why we experience different consciousnesses. There's irrefutable evidence that damaging the brain damages consciousness.
Right.
I always forget that guy's name, but if you look up it's like 1905 or something, this railroad pile driver guy, there's a misfire with the railroad spike, and it went up through his brain and it shot straight through his head and out the other side, and he didn't die. He just had a hole right through his eye, and he lost a chunk of his brain, and for the rest of his life,
his frontal lobe,
right,
specifically.
Yeah, and for the rest of his life, he had an incredibly different personality than he had before that accident. It just fundamentally altered who he was as a person. Right. And then there's all sorts of other experiences too. That over the past 100 years, we've found that doing things to the brain changes your experience of consciousness and changes your personality.
Right, which I think, honestly, is evidence that it's all very much physical.
Yeah.
In your brain, because if I take out a chunk of my frontal lobe, right, if I blend it up with some scalpels like they do for lobotomies and all that, that's going to change the way that my consciousness works. So that seems to be evidence to me. Although I suppose you could
it could fit into the receiver.
Yeah, I was just going to say it fits into the receiver theory.
Because if you mess with the radio,
right, like if I
you'll mess with the radio signal.
No, yeah,
or
exactly.
the one that you get out of that radio.
That's valid. So that's a good point.
Yeah, but then it's still this kind of ridiculous expectation. Sam Harris puts it nicely. He's like, so you expect us to believe that because if you damage part of the brain, you damage part of consciousness. But if you damage the entire brain at once at death, that the consciousness will rise off the body intact, like recognizing grandma speaking English.
Well, to be fair, though, I don't know if that's necessarily fair, because if we're looking at it from like the radio station thing, like that station is still coming in clear. You just need to get a better radio. Right. And if I throw the radio into the tub, sure, but the station's still going. I just got to get a new radio now.
Yeah. And so I think that's why it's intriguing, because it could be true.
Yeah, I think that's challenging. Yeah, I don't know. I've never thought of it in the sense of like a radio signal and that there's an ultimate stream of consciousness, but I don't know. That's tricky.
Yeah, I think there are some issues with that they're interesting, and it's an interesting idea that your brain is a radio receiver of consciousness rather than.
Yeah, that's challenging, because it seems to me to be at least of more or less like equal likelihood to the physical thing. I gotta chew on that one for a few days.
Yeah, you gotta look up some stuff about it.
I'll look into that.
From my memory, there are issues.
I'm sure there are, and I'm just not thinking of them.
Yeah, same. But that's okay. That can remain an open question for the purpose of this podcast, whether or not your brain, your consciousness is external or internal. However, it doesn't really speak much about God, unless you characterize.
I think it can, but I think that it's separate from the God problem.
Yeah, unless you were to say that field of consciousness is what God is. And then that'd be a very Hindu way of looking at things, of we are parts of God right now, and then when we die, we go back to complete godness.
The mainframe.
Yeah. Or it's also similar to the egg story, written by the guy who wrote The Martian, I think. But yeah, if you look that up, the egg, I think Kurzgesagt did a video on it. It's just a short story, and it's a good video, and it's a really interesting concept. However, like all this stuff, the point is we can't really assume
we
truth.
we can't know.
We can't know these things. So
Mm-hmm.
acting as if we do know them is disingenuous. They're interesting ideas that could be true. But some of these arguments are worse than others, though. That one's interesting. So yeah, God of the Gap's possible, I guess, that the refuge of God in that hole, in that gap of death, is where God actually is, if there is a God. But I still view it very unlikely.
I don't even know. Maybe I just lost the connection here, but the mainframe is the mainframe of consciousness God?
That's probably what it
But now we're just changing the definition of God again.
I don't know.
Like it seems like for each of these you have to change the definition of God for it to work. And so it's like then at this point it seems like we're just labeling things God that don't have to be called God. It can be called anything.
I guess then you would have to think that this field of consciousness that exists in its own dimension created the universe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for it to be God, rather than us being like physical things that consciousness dips into. It's that like this is all just an experience in a greater consciousness that we're having. Like it's a simulation, which I don't know. I mean, that's interesting.
Maybe simulation. You want to delve into the simulation?
Yeah,
you explain this good, so I'm gonna let you take this one full.
So I think where many theological arguments spend books worth of time trying to persuade you that God exists and fail, Nick Bostrom, the philosopher, does it quite well in like 3 sentences. So I think first, you have to think it's likely that we will get to a point where we can create lifelike simulations, where the participants of these simulations have their own consciousness and think that they're real just the same way we do. So if you think that maybe our technology will just continue getting better and better, and our computing, like our processing power, will continue getting better and better, that one day, it doesn't matter how far away it is, but just that one day we will be able to create a lifelike simulation. Then, what are the odds that we aren't already in one? Because if at any point in the future it's possible for humanity to create lifelike simulations, then how many can they create? Doesn't seem like there would be it's not a finite number, because you have these simulations that you can make however many you want, and then within those simulations, they too potentially could make simulations. Even if it's not a chain like that, even if it's just a variety of simulations, then you've got the idea of one first reality existing and multiple, even if it's just 2 or 3, multiple simulation realities. But there's no reason to believe, if this is possible, that it wouldn't be an ever-growing amount, just a constantly aggregating sum of simulation worlds that exists. Because every day some kid in his basement is booting up another simulation for fun. Right. And then the simulations themselves are making more simulations. So if you think of all the possible realities to exist in, one of them is the real one. All the rest are simulations. What are the odds that we are in the real one?
Yeah, it's not high.
Not very high at all.
Yeah, so I think for me, that's the most likely scenario in which we are artificially created.
Right.
Or, I mean, I suppose created, generally.
I mean, and that would be a case of intelligent design.
Right. And so for me, that's the most likely. And I think really the best way to pick that one apart, if we're picking it apart, is in the assumptions, right? Like, is that possible? And that, for me, brings into questions, again, of consciousness, right? Because it seems to me that, at least when I consider like my notions of free will, right, that it's these, it's essentially this really complicated multiple choice decisions that we're making all the time. It seems like, because I have free will in a perceived sense rather than in an actual sense, it seems that even like just the sims that we have today, like, I mean, current simulations that we have, the AI in there could hypothetically just think that they're in think that they're in the real world and they have like intelligent thought and everything. Right. Like how are we to know, like, can we know the difference between them and us? Right. Other than that, we have more choices. Like, I think that, like, I'm not claiming to know that they're different or that they're the same, but I just don't know if we can know the difference. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, who's to say that the video game characters in that game don't have some sort of internal consciousness? Right, like the characters in like Skyrim could totally think that they are real people just like us, and they have no idea we exist. Right. I mean, I think that's unlikely, but it potential. Right, because it's like, what's the difference between their consciousness and our consciousness? Right. I think it's kind of like how
we usually like to think of ourselves as more special than we actually are.
Right.
Like our consciousness is somehow fundamentally different from an animal's consciousness, which I don't think it is. So yeah, it's like a computerized consciousness.
Yeah, and we
for
only
them.
and we only know Skyrim characters have computerized consciousness because we have all of the available information, right? We created them, and we know that they're a program, or we know that we can interact with them in like a video game sense. The only reason we don't know that is because we're not, like, for us, is because we're not in like the driver's seat. We're not this potential god.
Right.
We're just existing within it.
Yeah.
And so that's why that's for me like the most convincing, because we don't have. But again, it comes down to frankly, I don't know, right? Because we don't have the information to know.
Yeah, it depends upon that being possible in the first place.
Right.
And also that humanity doesn't go extinct by the time we get there, which could happen.
I don't know. I honestly, like, and this is kind of tangential, but I don't think we're going to go extinct anytime soon. I think we make a lot of bad choices, but we're also like roaches in that way.
Well, it might not be soon. Like maybe we'll reach that point of technological advancement in 3,000 years, and in that time we're not around to do it.
I don't know. I think we will be.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm an optimist.
So do you think it's possible to make lifelike simulations?
I think it's possible. So it's like, so in the sense that I think the chances of God, right, where it's like I'm like 99% sure there is no God, but I'm leaving, some wiggle room. With the simulation variety of that, I would say it's more like there's 50-50 leaning towards the side of likely to say that we would get to that point technologically speaking, and by extension that it's possible we're already in it, because like I guess for it's a big I don't know, so I could go either way, because for me the big question is if it's possible, and then further, if it's possible, is it currently possible too? Because it's again this conception of consciousness, and when things start to have sort of like self-aware thought,
right?
So that's the big hurdle for me, is getting over the idea of what consciousness is in order to be able for me to say how possible I think it is, I guess.
Yeah, that might be the thing that we have to figure out first, of consciousness and how it arises and how it functions. Yeah, the thing is about the simulation is it doesn't need to actually look like a lifelike simulation from the perspective of the person who made it.
Exactly.
It only has to be lifelike for the people in it.
Because if that's all you know.
Right. Like, it could look like shitty pixel graphics.
Right. Like, if we accept that the Minecraft characters have consciousness, right? If they do.
They just think their world is blocks.
Yeah, that literally looks like real to them.
I mean, that is their world, yeah.
Yeah, that's what reality is. It's in the same way that, like, I say that, like, our life is our infinity, because that's what we know.
Yeah.
Right? You can't conceptualize not living.
And I think this is a technological way of putting Plato's argument for God, of like his ideal, the Platonic ideals of how there's like a higher dimensional world where things exist in their pure and perfect form.
Oh, are you talking about the
cave?
The cave?
Yeah.
This is a nitpick aside,
Okay.
but I hate attributing Socrates' ideas to Plato just because Plato wrote them down. Everybody always calls it Plato's Republic and talks about Plato's cave.
Well,
but weren't they all said by Socrates, and Plato was just writing it down?
Here's the thing, though. Plato included Socrates as the character within them, and claims. I mean, it's believed sometimes that Socrates was Plato's teacher, and then Plato wrote down the stuff that Socrates said. There's also reason to believe that Socrates never even existed.
Oh, interesting.
And that Socrates is just a guy that Plato made up in his books.
Why would Plato do that?
Because that's the format of the books, is these two characters talking to each other.
Okay, that's fair. Interesting. Is there any, like, and we're going a little bit on a tangent here, but is there any like evidence that Socrates existed in Athens at the time, or no?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of that information has been burnt in like the Library of Alexandria kind of thing.
Right.
I don't know if they're like contemporary of those times, but there are like busts of like Socrates.
Yeah, that's true.
But there are also busts of like Athena and Aphrodite and Jesus.
That's true.
So he could have been a mythological figure for them.
Fascinating. All right.
So that's why I call it Plato's cave.
Okay,
not only because he's the author, but Socrates might not have been real.
Allegory of the cave. But yeah, so maybe I'll since I spent too much of a semester talking about the cave, I can quickly explain the cave for anyone who's not familiar.
Sure, do it.
The allegory of the cave. Basically, you are a prisoner in a cave, right? And you're chained to a wall, okay? And further, your head is essentially latched in place so that you really
can't turn it.
Yeah, you can't. You can only look ahead, right? And you can't move. And that's where you spend your whole life, right? And you can see this wall in front of you, and behind you, like behind and above you, is a fire, right? You don't know that it's fire, but for you, that's just the light source, right? Yeah. And also behind you is a walkway, and essentially, as people and the things that they carry and animals and stuff walk past behind you, for you, the shadows you see on the wall in front of you is your entire reality. Like, you're not seeing shadows of people and their sounds walk past. You're seeing people walk past. I mean, for you,
two-dimensional people.
Yeah, if that's your whole reality, like that's like, this shadow makes this noise, and you attribute and you essentially create your entire reality around these shadows. But now say one day you break free, or someone lets you free of your chains, and you walk up, onto this walkway for the first time. Now suddenly you realize, oh, the light source was this fire, and these people are actually here. So then you have this whole awakening here. But then to go further, you exit the cave, right, into the sun, and you're initially blinded by the light, right? You're initially overwhelmed by what reality really is. And so this is sort of where you have the difference between the people who like essentially live in denial and the people who accept truth, right? Because some people walk out into the sun and it'll hurt their eyes, and they'll go back down and they'll live their life in the cave.
Yeah.
They don't want to know. They're like, that was painful, that hurt, I didn't like it. But if you endure the pain and you let your eyes adjust, then you can learn truth. And that's more or less the allegory of the cave.
I think Plato's allegory of the cave is brilliant on multiple levels. Mm-hmm. Not for the reason of God inference, though. It kind of deals with the simulation thing. For instance, like, if you come out of this cave after living your whole life in a two-dimensional looking world and then see the three-dimensional world in like the sun and everything, why do you then have any reason at all to believe that that's the real world?
Right.
And that's basically what Plato thinks with his ideal forms, is that beyond our experience and perception of the world, there are things in a more pure and perfect form. That like a table has the ideal essence of what a table means out in this extra-dimensional universe.
Do you think that's... I could be wrong. Do you think that is maybe a slippery slope fallacy? Because of the fact that, so it's like, because I found out that this reality that I perceived is unreal, therefore, like I think it's fair to question and say, how can I know that this reality is real?
Yeah.
But I think it is, so I think that's fair, reasonable, and logical and all that. But I think it's not reasonable to make the leap further and say that this is definitively not real.
Right, the definitive part, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have a suspicion. It's like you wake up from a dream, and how can you be sure you're still not in a yet deeper dream?
So you have a suspicion, but it's not... Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I think the really brilliant thing about this is I think Plato was on to like higher dimensionality, 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D, like string theory stuff.
Yeah.
These are the words he put it in, and he kind of framed it in like a God concept of like the Platonic...
Oh, the forms?
The forms of like a perfect thing, and the most perfect of perfect things is God.
Yeah, and the essence of beauty and all that other kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think thinking about it like this metaphor with like you see in 2 dimensions, then you go to the 3-dimensional world, I think that can and should be traced further into higher dimensions that probably exist in the universe and that we just aren't capable of perceiving. Mm-hmm. I don't think that means anything about God. I don't think God is equivalent to higher dimensions.
Right.
But just the fact that 4-dimensional existence is a thing, and 5-dimensional existence, and 6-dimensional existence, except, we only live perceiving 3 dimensions. So I think it's a good way to think about what it would mean in a world where we actually could perceive higher dimensions.
I think as a scientific version of the allegory of the cave is like how there are more colors that exist than what we see.
Right.
But our eyes are only developed to see the colors. Like, we can only see the colors and hues that we currently see. Right. But that doesn't mean that
the 3 primary colors.
Yeah. Other colors exist, but we don't have the tools in order to perceive them. The light just does it. It reflects differently, It's just a different shade of the colors that we see.
One thing that I'm always fascinated by is mantis shrimp, because I might have talked about this before too, but whatever. We have 3 receptor cones in our eyes. One for blue, one for red, one for yellow. Those are the primary colors?
No, I thought it was RGB. Red, green, blue.
Red, green, blue. No, green is a combination of yellow and blue.
Yeah.
So it's red, yellow, and
yeah, I was thinking of like video games and stuff.
No, it's red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors.
Yeah.
So we have a receptor cone, I believe, for each of those colors in our retinas. Dogs have 2 receptor cones in their retinas, so they can't see like a lot of the colors that we see. Mantis shrimp have, it depends on the individual mantis shrimp, they're weird. They have between like 12 and 16 receptor cones in their eyes.
That's incredible.
So they can see billions of colors that we can't even imagine.
Uh-huh.
And that's not to say that, like...
That's incredible.
It's hard to think of it
and they're
like
in the ocean, too.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's hard to think, because does that mean, like, if we somehow had access to these colors, would they be, like, completely, like, fundamental colors, like blue and yellow and red? Or would they look more like complex shades of things?
Well, what's interesting is I read something some time ago, and so I'm going to butcher the retelling. It was a lot more crazy and eye-opening when I read it. But something about how a lot of the ancient Greeks, like Homer, for example.
Oh, is this about blue?
Yeah, about blue. Do you can probably explain this better than I can.
No, go for it.
Okay, I'll attempt. I'm going to miss a lot. But essentially, that they didn't have a word for the color blue for a while because, like, the ocean was generally perceived as, like, black, or gray or
green
something.
Sometimes.
Or green, right? And so because I think there was, like, I think it was because there was, like, a lack of blue things around them that there wasn't a need to describe blue, and so blue more or less didn't exist. It was just considered a shade of other colors.
Yeah, there was like a lack of a cultural understanding of what blue is. So then if you look at really old images, or not images, paintings and stuff like that, of these areas that didn't have blue or didn't think they had blue, they paint the sky, the grass, and the ocean as all different shades of the same color, all different greens, or maybe like if it's the ocean, on like it could be black sometimes. Even though they could see blue, they didn't distinguish it as being different from green.
Right, like the blue sky was just considered a green sky.
Yeah,
but it looked blue.
Yeah, I mean it looked blue, but they in their minds they thought of it as yet another green shade.
Yeah, right. No, yeah, for sure.
Or yet another yellow shade, depending on how the sky looks that day, or white.
I wonder. Do you think that will be a continual thing where shades will start to receive their own color? Or?
I mean, that's probably been happening. I have no concrete evidence of this, but it seems to be true that over the course of history, we've been just distinguishing between more and more shades of colors. I don't know. Did you have in your mind the knowledge and differentiation between like burgundy and what was
fuchsia?
No, not fuchsia.
All right, no, burgundy and
maroon.
Maroon.
Like, did you have the difference between burgundy and maroon in your mind like 500 years ago? Probably not. You'd probably just think like, that's like, it's
red,
dark red. That might not be true, but it seems like we're like naming
as like
more and more
as our reality and language becomes more complex, we get more refined in our details.
Yeah, it's like our ideas of things are like actually like fundamental in shaping what we think is like true.
Yeah.
If we don't have a different concept in our heads of blue and green, then blue and green for our experience doesn't actually exist. Like only one of them does.
Right.
But it's interesting to think about for the mantis shrimp thing, because it's probably the case. I mean, it is the case that right now, all the colors that I'm seeing when I look at you or look at the room, if something like a wardrobe or your shirt looks like a solid color, it's not a solid color. There's like an abundance of colors there, but I'm only perceiving one of them.
Right.
So like your face could just be a complex rainbow of colors, and I just see like the general skin tone that we all see.
Right.
But in reality, it's so much more vibrant.
And what adds an additional layer of complexity to that too is how color works, because it's essentially just like a given surface is absorbing the light
the
electromagnetic
of all the other
spectrum colors except that one, and that one reflects back on you.
Yeah.
So it's really everything's a rainbow almost.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Because it's like that wall is everything except for white.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I think that's it.
That's how light works.
Fascinating. Science is cool.
Yeah. All right, so that was the a tangent on the simulation argument.
Yeah, the simulation
argument. But the point is, the simulation doesn't have to look good from your outside perspective. And it's the same thing with Plato's allegory of the cave. You have this cave dimension that looks like two-dimensional shit version of reality. But then there's also the possibility that you have a four-dimensional version that the three-dimensional version looks like shit too. And you can get more and more real as you go, but you don't know where the end is.
Exactly.
We haven't even gone through most of these that I wrote down. Do you want to do more, or
What time is it?
We're like, of recording time, we're like 2 hours and 40 minutes in.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, I got a little bit more time. I got some stuff to do tonight, but yeah, no, we can go for like.
Okay, we try to quickly do a few others of these arguments.
Bang some stuff out like 30 minutes.
So, we've talked about the argument from assertion, which is merely just claiming that God exists without any sort of evidence of it, just asserting that it's true. We talked a little bit about how there's a fear going on, but there's an argument from comfort or from the fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is an appeal to emotion, of course, because people are afraid that they will of dying, of going back to nothingness, that they use that as a reason that God exists, that there actually is no death to be had at all.
Yeah, but I think that, again, that is sort of, ties into Pascal's wager, and it's also kind of like related to essentially just like ignorance,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I
appeal
think
to emotion is mostly what that is.
Yeah, you just because you're scared, so you believe in God, but then you don't really believe in God.
Well, you believe to make yourself not afraid of death anymore.
Right, but you can't. But that's the thing, though, is you don't make yourself believe. You either truly believe it or you truly don't. Because you can claim to believe in God because you're scared of going to hell and death and all that. But I think you either truly believe or you don't. And I suppose you could believe because you're scared. So I guess I see what you're saying, but like...
Yeah, I don't think it's quite the same as like the kind of belief that would form from Pascal's wager of like a calculated decision.
Yeah, it's more like you're scared, so it's like your
it's
brain...
Like it's a defense mechanism.
Your brain literally makes it up.
Yes. To
make you feel better. But so I think it's literally just that. Like, right. I don't think that's a good reason to believe in God. I think it's a descriptive reason that people believe in God rather than a prescriptive reason. I believe in God because it's like because I get scared thinking about death.
Right.
But that doesn't tell me why I should believe in God or prove that God is true. You're simply just describing your reason for believing in God. Yeah. So I think that's what that is.
Yeah, believing in something because you're afraid of its non-existence isn't proof that it exists.
Exactly.
We talked about this a little bit too, about the power of belief or believing in belief. But the argument from utility is saying that it is useful, it is a good thing, it is practical to believe in God. Believe in God has some value to it, therefore you should do it.
Yeah, I'm doubtful of that.
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's obvious. Even if it does have utility, it has no relevance to the truth value of God. Right. Just because if it were practical and useful to believe in God, it does not mean God exists.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's descriptive rather than prescriptive.
So there's the argument from tradition as well of, we've believed in God as a human race for, probably a couple thousand years at least.
Yeah.
We believed in the Christian God specifically in the Western society for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So
one of my least favorite things in the world is when people excuse belief or the continued practice of anything due to tradition.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is predictable, so forgive me, but I'm going to bring up slavery because you're essentially making the same argument that because if you're saying we should believe in God because we've always believed in God, well, we did slavery for a really long time and we chose not to do slavery anymore because it was a bad idea. In the same way that just because we've believed in God for a long time doesn't make it true or good.
Right.
It just means we've done it for a long time.
Well, I think implicit in the argument from tradition is also the argument from utility. You're saying, we've done this for a long time and it's worked pretty well for us so far, so let's keep doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really regressive and almost privileged take on it, right? Because generally progression and change is initiated either by or for groups that are harmed by the status quo, right? Like, we don't try to make things better for people who already are doing okay, right? There's people who are suffering due to certain aspects of our society, and we want them to not suffer, so we change that, right? And so to say that we should just keep it the way it is because it's worked out pretty well for us so far, it's worked out pretty well for people like you who have probably benefited from the way that things worked out, right? But if you are a woman, or if you are a person of color living in a westernized state, things have not been good for you, And so if we extend this now to religion, right? Well, how has religion treated the human race? Well, if you want, we can do an entire other podcast episode merely attempting to document all of the tangible harm that has been done directly by religion or people taking advantage of religion. People in African countries, religious leaders encouraging them not to take vaccines or wear condoms because it's unholy.
Or for female genital mutilation.
Yeah, there's female genital mutilation. People use religion to...
Or male genital mutilation. That's really common right now.
Yeah,
nobody talks about that.
Yeah, with male circumcision is a big issue. I mean, there is the Crusades, which apparently some people don't even realize is bad, because there's a certain high school in a certain town that Wade and I are familiar with whose mascot is the Crusaders, which just sounds baffling to me.
I mean, it's a cool word.
It's a cool word, but like, I mean, that's...
And maybe like if you dismiss, if you don't think about all the murder, it's cool to think about like knights, going on a quest.
Yeah, no, that's true. But they're going on a quest to do what?
Take back the Holy Land.
Mm-hmm. And kill people.
Everyone who's there that isn't them.
Sounds like really great. Yeah. Awesome.
And in some cases to find the Holy Grail.
Yeah, well...
Yeah.
Indiana Jones was working on that.
He's on case. Yeah, generally, that's just a straight up fallacy too. Using tradition as an argument. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing it's like the reverse of the argument from novelty. Just because something is new doesn't mean it's good either.
Yeah.
How about the argument of using the lack of evidence as evidence?
Oh yeah, that one really gets me going too. So this is funny. So I can have a quick little story to attach to this. So I banged the table. So in a class, one of my classes that I'm taking this semester, at the beginning of the semester is sort of like introductory, because we were talking about like epistemology and ontology and all this other stuff, And so the professor, as an exercise, asked us, raise your hand if you believe in ghosts. Raise your hand if you don't believe in ghosts, right? And then she, proceeded to then ask us why we do or don't believe in ghosts. And this one guy who raised his hand saying that he believes in ghosts said that, well, there's not really any evidence that they don't exist. And naturally, I had to physically restrain myself from ejecting out of my chair through the roof, because I think that's such a preposterous argument. I mean, it's literally, I feel like a broken record here, but like invisible cats, right? So if I make a claim that something exists and I have no evidence that said thing exists, and then you say it doesn't exist, the burden of proof is on me because I have no evidence showing that it exists. I have to provide evidence. Because if I say something that's invisible and is doing no real life, like is making no change on the tangible world, the burden of proof is on me to prove that it exists.
Right.
I just that's it.
Yeah. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this one? The argument for morality. This is basically how it goes.
Oh, yeah.
We could not have objective, like absolute moral standards without God. Mm-hmm. And we do have objective moral standards. Therefore, God exists. Frank Turek is a fan of this one.
You want to take that one?
Sure.
I'll let you take the lead.
One is, I'm not sure that the first part is even true, that we can't have objective morality without God's existence. Mm-hmm. I think we currently, I think there is such thing as objective morality, or at least close to it. Objective in the sense of, shared across humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes from our shared biology and physiology and the fact that we have an evolutionary history together of being humans, that we're coded by evolution in the same way as to how we want to be treated. No God requirement there. But then also the second part is to claim that we do have this objective morality. I think, because in the way I just said, that's only approximately objective. It's it's still relative. It's relative to humanity, or it's relative to Earth anyway.
So it's more objective.
It's more objective. It's objective. It seems objective from my standpoint,
right?
But from the universe's standpoint, it is not objective. Mm-hmm.
So from the universe's standpoint, there is no objective morality.
Yeah, there's no morality at all.
For all intents and purposes, for what's relevant to the human race,
yes, there is
mostly objective morality.
Yeah, that would be my argument. And then, so the second part of that argument for morality is saying that there is objective, as a feature of the universe, objective morality. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that's the case.
That seems ridiculous. What is there, a big scroll in the metaphysical sky or something? That just seems silly and absurd to me.
Yeah, to me it seems to come down to we want there to be some sort of objective morality that we can hold everyone else to not be gay, or whatever else the case may be. Therefore, we have to invoke God.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that to think that in the universe, okay, the universe is big, right?
Pretty big.
The universe is very large. And so to make the claim that the universe or God or whomever has any care at all who's having sex with who on Earth in the Milky Way the Milky Way galaxy is pretty insignificant in the universe. So to suggest that Earth, within this solar system, within the Milky Way galaxy, that the universe is concerned with a specific species on a specific planet and who they're having sex with, that just seems like a reach. I feel like...
It seems more plausible that the Catholic Church, as an organization, is interested in who you're having sex with.
Right. I don't think the universe cares what you're doing in your free time.
Yeah, but as we know, over the course of history, it seems like religious people, or people in general, like to assume or overemphasize our place in the universe, thinking that the Earth is the center of the solar system.
Well, it's because humans are naturally narcissistic.
Right. Or anthropocentric.
Yes.
And I think, the argument for morality is just that, again. Also kind of an appeal to emotion. Like, we like thinking the things we think, therefore God thinks those things as well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
God backs us up.
Because we idealize God.
God backs us up, even though other people with different views claim to also have their views from God.
Right. And then they kill each other.
Yep. So how about the argument from improbability? So this one goes, it is extremely improbable that the universe came to be, or that we exist in this way that we do. Like, for instance, they use like the fine-tuning, so that's what the word they like to use, of the universe. Like, if the cosmological constant was like 0.0001 did like unit off from what it is, the universe as we know it couldn't exist. If like the force of gravity didn't exist the way it does, nothing could assemble.
But again, I mean, it doesn't even, I mean, we don't even have to go further with that, I don't think. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how unlikely the universe is. That doesn't mean it's artificially designed.
Yeah, that's true. If given an infinite time span, like a truly infinite time span, everything possible will happen.
Right.
So even if it's extremely unlikely, a universe will form. There's also the fact that I think that argument from improbability is at its roots an argument from ignorance. It's a lot of the times the way people put this is that it's like so improbable for humans to just exist, like, or like the Earth to exist, like to like all of a sudden come into being. They talk as if it happened all at once, misunderstanding the extremely long periods of time in the process of evolution of things, complexity building up over time rather than just snapping into existence. Even if, let's say, that the Big Bang was the very start of everything, which could be, that's not a very complex start. It's just a bunch of particles. They're not combined into anything at all. They're just individual particles. And then over 14 billion years, things build up in complexity to get to the point where they are in the shape of animals and Earths and suns.
Right. Yeah. It's a culmination of events.
So it looks improbable when you take it all in one instant, but when you stretch it over extremely long time spans, it's no longer so improbable. Also, I think here one of my favorite things that I've learned over the years is the anthropic principle.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's so deftly just deflates a lot of religious argument, especially this argument from improbability. Because they like to also say for the argument from improbability that like the Goldilocks zone of Earth being around just close enough to the sun that, we have heat to sustain life, but not too far away where it's too cold. And, we have an atmosphere and all this stuff. Like the fine tuning of our existence allows for life to exist. The anthropic principle says that where else could you find life?
Right, exactly. Like, of course there's life here. Like
the only place you can find life is in the Goldilocks zones where life exists. Like you need first these things to, like these, the heat and the distance from the sun and the size of the Earth and the rockiness of the Earth. You need all those first in order for life to even come about. And then it comes about after the fact. The fact that we are here observing it is evidence to the fact that it's not as improbable as we think it is because it happened.
Right. Well, and it's like, it has to happen at some point. I mean, it's not like we're in like, it's not like we live in solar system number 1. We live in a solar system amongst millions, if not billions of other solar systems.
Right.
And counting, Yeah. And so, like you were saying before, when the universe is ever expanding, it's it must happen eventually that there is intelligent life form or life
Right.
period, you know?
Yeah, like there's quadrillions upon quadrillions of stars in the universe.
Yeah, it must happen
And-
at some point. It has to.
And as we survey more and more of the universe, we're coming to realize that it seems to be more than likely that every single star has a planet,
Mm-hmm.
at least one planet. So if you've got quadrillions and quadrillions of stars, and even like 0.0001% of them have a Earth-like planet in its like Goldilocks zone,
Mm-hmm.
and 0.0001% of those develop life,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be a shit ton of life in the universe.
Yeah, because there's a lot of universe.
Yeah.
And it's growing. It's ever expanding.
And then, there's the things like there's things like the Fermi paradox, which is if the universe is so teeming with life as we would have every reason to believe it is, why haven't we found any evidence of it yet? Any aliens?
It's also really big.
Yeah, it's really big.
Yeah.
Really fucking big.
Yeah, and we're really small.
Right. And we don't have a very long reach.
Yeah, we don't go far.
Like, we can't see very far.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even when we do find a planet, we don't actually observe that planet. We infer its like existence by like seeing its shadow around
Yeah,
a
it's
star.
like yes.
Yeah,
it's
like the wobble
super-
effect.
Mm-hmm.
We don't actually like get to look at the Earth's surface and see like, oh yeah, there's some chimpanzees on that planet over there.
Yeah, we can just get the big telescope
Yeah.
out and
I mean,
zoom in.
Perhaps if we keep investing in gigantic telescopes, we'll get to
Right.
that point. This is something really interesting, not related at all to this God stuff, but there's gravitational lens, like magnification that you can use,
Okay.
like solar lenses. Basically what happens is the light diffracts around stars in such a way that it forms focal points
Oh yeah.
where you can like see stars behind other stars, for instance,
Oh right.
even though you shouldn't be able to, but I mean, according to like the trajectory of it, but the light bends around those stars.
Right.
So there's this point where the light reaches, and you can use that as a magnifying lens. So if you get 500 astronomical units away from the sun, which is 500 Earth distances away from the sun, then you can actually use the Earth as a magnifying lens. I mean, not the Earth, the sun. You can use the sun as a magnifying lens to look around the sun at extremely far distances away and use it as a gigantic sun-sized telescope.
That's crazy.
So if we were to ever build a space station way outside, like along like the Kuiper Belt or wherever it is, then we could probably see some extremely deep space stuff
That's cool.
with big
I bet you that's a lot of money.
Yeah, but it should be done because I mean maybe that's the type of gigantic telescope lens we need to be able to actually see the surfaces of distant planets.
That'd be sweet.
I know, probably a lot easier to find intelligent life.
Yeah.
Anyway, argument from probability. I think it's misrepresenting. It's forming a straw man. It's using the example of this happens a lot. It's like Earth forming is like the way it is as improbable as a bunch of spare parts getting sucked up in a tornado and then forming an airplane.
Oh right. Yeah.
It's like no, that's a misrepresentation of it
Mm-hmm.
because it's happening over long periods of time.
Right.
If this tornado is going on for billions of years and is constantly sucking in stuff and spitting it back out, one in every quadrillion things it makes might be an airplane. The rest are just garbage.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's like if you. Yeah. I mean, it's simple probability.
Yeah. What do you think about the argument from miracles? Using miracles as evidence that God exists.
I think that is frankly unscientific, and you can't use an anecdotal, inexplicable event as proof of God. I mean, it again comes back to that, like, just because I don't know why something happened, or because something that I thought was unlikely or impossible happened, means that it was God, when in reality, it just simply means that there's more for you to learn. And, like, it's just an anecdotal, like, I don't think there's really much to say with the miracles, like...
Yeah, it's an anecdote that you're just,
Yeah.
you saw a thing happen. It's also...
it's really subjective, too.
It's also, a lot of these miracles, so-called miracles, there's not very good reason to believe that they actually happened.
Right.
For instance, the supposed miracle of Jesus, of his resurrecting after death and then going up to heaven. Because, God had a son with himself that is himself, and he sacrificed himself to himself.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, that's even more preposterous. Like, when you said miracles, I was thinking about, like, something that, like, someone in the modern day would claim as a miracle. If you're talking about the miracles in the Bible, I mean, there's even more because it's like you have to be able to substantiate those claims.
Yeah.
Just because the miracle is written in the Bible doesn't make it true.
Right.
Right. Like, oh,
you can write anything in a book.
Yeah, the Bible is true. Okay, well, can you prove it? No. Okay, so then how can that's ridiculous. Like I didn't even think that was like
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that goes into the argument from scripture, which is like the same thing, like saying that, oh, the Bible says this happened, so it happened. You don't have any evidence that the Bible is a good source of information.
Right, and further, how do you know that what the Quran and everything else said is the right one? I mean, there's a number of issues with that are I think obvious.
In fact, there's lots of things in the Bible that seem to not have happened, and we found that through archaeology.
Right.
Like there's no evidence of Moses parting the Red Sea.
This might be a can of worms I don't want to open. But if the Bible is true and truth is good, then what about that whole thing where they're like, oh, we just ignore the whole stoning of women and
there's the cherry picking from the Bible as well.
Right, because you can't cherry pick from the Bible, but then also claim that the Bible is true and that truth is good.
Right. That also goes back into the argument for morality, because people like to claim that the morality comes from God, but it obviously doesn't, because you're cherry picking God's word.
Exactly.
So your morality comes from somewhere within you. And you're choosing like which parts of the Bible to
because when they wrote
adopt.
because when they wrote the New Testament and we're like, okay, this is where we're gonna outline new moral principles.
Yeah. Right. You had to
I thought God had the morals already.
I know. That's the whole thing. Like if the New Testament shouldn't need to exist if God is perfect, and if
was God waiting until slavery wasn't trending anymore? Like,
well, slavery is still trending in the New Testament.
We're right, but okay, I'm sorry. How about stoning your wife? Stoning your wife wasn't as popular anymore, so he's like, let's revise. Like, if he dictates morality, it should have just been the same the whole time.
I know. Yeah,
it's a little ridiculous.
And it's the fact that you as an individual Christian or whatever it may be, you're saying like, oh, that part of the Bible isn't what I follow. So it's not like the morality is coming from God; it's coming from you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, and also the argument from miracles. Let's say Jesus' resurrection really happened. Why would that prove God exists?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it did, which, I mean, it's absurd to believe that it did.
Mm-hmm.
But even if any of these individual miracles actually happened,
mm-hmm.
it doesn't actually say that God exists.
Right.
Like, if a guy dies and then resurrects, I mean, that's pretty freaking weird.
Mm-hmm.
But why would it mean...
we can't know that it was God.
Yeah.
I mean, And further, which God?
Right. Just like seeing something funky or crazy or something that, according to your knowledge, shouldn't be true doesn't mean, that means God exists.
Yeah.
Well, we have a few more arguments we didn't get to, but I think that's fine. Like the argument from desire, argument from consciousness. Kind of talked about that one a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that so far, the argument from consciousness is, if anything, maybe one of the stronger ones then.
Yeah, argument from consciousness, I think, is a stronger and challenging one, but in the sense that it
claims to know something that we don't know.
Right. Like a lot of these are just like logically incoherent, fallacious, and just bad arguments.
Right.
The consciousness one, I think, is a true dilemma of knowledge, where we have such a lack of knowledge in that area that we really can't make strong claims. I think that's what I would say about that.
Yeah. So I think we'll probably end things here then.
Okay.
Any parting words on the topic?
I guess just simply that I'm not claiming to know for sure that God doesn't exist. But I think it's pretty. But I do think it is ridiculous to claim to know that he does.
Yeah.
Or they do, because there is no evidence, and it's mostly that. Yeah. Yeah.
You probably should follow the evidence, wherever it leads, and not assume to know things that we have not actually verified to be true through evidence or observation.
Yeah, it's okay to not know
experimentation.
Things.
Yeah, you should probably feel comfortable admitting lack of knowledge, and given the fact that God is purported to be good and all-powerful and everything else, it seems to me rather unlikely that he does exist, or it does exist, given the universe that we live in.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for interesting.
You just do that again. Cut that one out.